Rain fell on Arlington like tears from a sky that had witnessed too many wars. The year was 1980, and the earth was fresh over a grave that bore the weight of two oceans and a lifetime of service. Young Claire Donnelly stood at attention in her dress uniform, water streaming down her face, though whether it came from the heavens or her own grief, she could no longer tell. The headstone was simple granite, carved with words that could never contain the man beneath. Thomas Donnelly, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 1923 to 1983, Iwo Jima, Korea. The dates marked conflicts, but they could not mark the cost. She was 21 years old enough to wear the uniform, too young to understand that some promises cut deeper than any wound. 3 days earlier, she had sat beside his hospital bed at Walter Reed, watching cancer consume what the Japanese and North Koreans could not kill. His hand, once capable of field-stripping a Browning automatic rifle in darkness, trembled against the white sheets. The morphine had made him forget her name, but it could not erase the names he whispered in delirium. Rodriguez, Takahashi, Williams, O'Malley, Henderson, Kowalski, Chen. 7 names, always 7, repeated like a rosary for sins that would not absolve. Claire had leaned close, trying to hear his labored breathing over the machine keeping him tethered to this world. His eyes had opened then, suddenly clear, burning with the intensity she remembered from childhood when he taught her to shoot, to track, to see what others missed. "Promise me," he had rasped, his voice gravel and broken glass. His grip on her wrist was surprising in its strength, desperate. "Promise me, Claire. Bring them home, all of them, not like I did." The names again, falling from his lips like accusations. The 7 Marines he had left on Iwo Jima's black sand. Boys he had led up Mount Suribachi, boys who did not come down. The decision he had made as a young sergeant, 22 years old, choosing to advance with the main force rather than stay with the wounded. A tactical decision, the correct decision, the decision that haunted him for 40 years. "I promise, Dad," she had whispered back. "I promise I will bring them all home." He had died 17 minutes later, still whispering those 7 names. Now she stood over him in the rain, rendering the final salute. Around her, other mourners dispersed, umbrellas blooming black against the gray afternoon. Old men in Marine Corps jackets, their backs bent by time, but their bearing still proud. Her mother had already left, unable to watch the burial, unable to witness the lowering of a man who had left her emotionally decades before he left physically. Claire remained alone as the honor guard folded the flag with mechanical precision, each crease perfect, each movement practiced. The ritual of a nation that buries its warriors with ceremony because it cannot bury its wars. The sergeant approached, the triangle of folded cloth cradled in his white-gloved hands. He knelt before her mother's empty chair, then seeing she was gone, turned to Claire. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he began. She took the flag. It was heavier than she expected. Everything was heavier than she expected. When they were gone and she stood truly alone among the white stones that stretched in perfect rows like soldiers on eternal parade, she knelt on the wet grass. Her uniform soaked through, her hands pressed against the earth that covered him. "I promise," she whispered again to the ground, to the ghost, to the girl she would stop being from this moment forward. "I will bring them all home, Dad. All of them." The rain intensified, washing away the tears, washing away the softness, leaving only the promise carved into her heart, like those 7 names were carved into his. She did not know then that promises made to the dead bind tighter than chains. She did not know that 41 years later, she would still be trying to keep it. The letters on the screen glowed green against black. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, March 2024. 41 years later. Master Sergeant Claire Donnelly sat in the secure compartmented information facility, buried 3 levels beneath the Army's Special Operations Command headquarters. The room smelled of recycled air and the particular staleness that came from spaces where sunlight never reached. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a frequency that made her head ache, though that might have been the tumor pressing against her skull, or the fatigue that never left anymore, or simply the weight of being 62 years old in a profession designed for the young. She coughed into her fist, turning her head away from the camera that she knew watched from the ceiling corner. When she pulled her hand away, there were flecks of red on her palm. She wiped them quickly on the dark fabric of her cargo pants where they would not show. Across the table, Colonel James Marshall studied her with eyes that had learned to read terrain and people with equal precision. He was 55, trim and sharp in his service uniform, every ribbon and tab placed with the exactness that came from 30 years of military discipline. She had trained him once, back when he was a young lieutenant, and she was already becoming the legend that no one could quite verify. Claire, he said, his voice carrying the particular softness of a commander about to ask for something he knew would cost. His use of her first name was deliberate, sidestepping rank in favor of the relationship they had built over decades. She met his gaze without flinching. I am retired in 6 weeks, Jim. The doctors gave me 18 months. Probably less, given what I do to my lungs in this job. Find someone else for whatever ghost you are about to conjure. He slid a manila folder across the polished table. It whispered against the wood, a sound like secrets being shared. The classification markings were stamped in red. Top secret, special compartmented information. No foreign nationals. Operation Shepherd's Crook, he said, and something in his voice made her look up sharply. The operation was named after her call sign, the one she had earned in a war the Army still refused to acknowledge she had fought. She opened the folder with hands that showed every one of her 62 years. Liver spots, scars, veins prominent under skin that had thinned from age and illness. The hands of a woman who had held too many rifles, tied too many tourniquets, closed too many eyes. The briefing materials were sparse. SEAL Team Vanguard, Direct Action Mission, Coast Province, Afghanistan. Recover high-value assets, specifically a CIA interpreter who had gone dark with intelligence regarding final withdrawal operations. Secondary objective, retrieve hard drive from a downed RQ-70 Sentinel surveillance drone before hostile forces could exploit its encrypted data. Standard operation, until she reached the intelligence annex. 3 previous reconnaissance teams had gone dark in the operational area. Not killed, not captured with proof of life. Simply gone. Vanished into the mountains like smoke. The pattern analysis was what made her hands still on the page. Ambush sites formed a herringbone layout. Classic Soviet doctrine. The kind of tactical signature that had not been seen in Afghanistan since the 1980s when the Soviets themselves occupied these same valleys. Someone is advising them, she said quietly. Someone who fought in the first Afghan war. Marshall nodded slowly. That is what we think. That is why we need you. She looked up from the folder. You need me as what? Liaison? Which is military speak for babysitter for a SEAL team that will resent my presence and ignore my advice until someone dies. Marshall leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. You are the only operator I trust to read terrain that satellites cannot analyze. You are the only one left who speaks the language of ambushes from that era. You fought those Soviet advisors in Central America. You know how they think. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air thinner. She could feel the weight of history pressing down, the way the past never stayed buried no matter how much earth you piled on top. El Salvador, she said, not a question but an acknowledgement. You read the real file. Marshall reached into his briefcase and withdrew a second folder. This one was older, the edges worn. When he opened it, she could see her own face looking back from a photograph taken 4 decades ago. 22 years old, jungle fatigues, rifle held with the casual competence of someone who slept with it. Her eyes in that photo were different, harder, hungrier, still believing that perfect execution could prevent loss. Claire Donnelly, the file read, Special Activities Division, Paramilitary Operations Officer, El Salvador 1983 to 1987. Embedded advisor to Salvadoran Armed Forces, counterinsurgency operations against Farabundo Martí, National Liberation Front forces. Below that, the statistics that defined 4 years of her life. 31 ambushes survived. 22 host nation personnel successfully extracted from combat operations. 7 killed in action under her command. She closed her eyes. The fluorescent lights burned red through her eyelids. She could hear the names as clearly as if her father's ghost spoke them. Carlos, Miguel, Jose, Antonio, Fernando, Raul, Diego. 7 names, always 7, the ones who did not come home. When she opened her eyes, Marshall was watching her with something approaching sympathy. The lung cancer, she said, deflecting. It is not from cigarettes. It is from exposure. What was in those jungle defoliant cocktails the CIA used, combined with burning plastic and diesel fumes from waste disposal pits? The VA finally acknowledged the connection last year. 18 months, they said. Maybe 2 years if I behave. I have never behaved. Jim, she continued, her voice taking on the tone of command that decades of service had honed. I am dying. Let me die in peace. Send someone younger, someone who still believes they can save everyone. That is exactly why it has to be you, Marshall said quietly. He tapped the intelligence annex showing the ambush patterns. This is not a young operator's fight. This is not about speed or strength. This is about recognizing patterns, about seeing the terrain beneath the terrain, about understanding that the enemy has studied us as thoroughly as we have studied them. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Claire, 3 teams have disappeared. Good teams, professional teams. They had all the technology, all the training, all the confidence of a military that has not fought a peer adversary in 80 years. And they walked into these mountains and never came back. What makes you think I will come back? She asked. I do not, he admitted. The honesty was brutal and clean. But I think you will give those SEAL operators a chance. I think you will see what is waiting for them in those valleys. I think you are the only one who can. She was quiet for a long time, studying the maps, the ambush patterns, the topology that reminded her of other mountains in other countries where men who spoke Russian taught local fighters how to kill Americans efficiently. Finally, she spoke. The SEAL team, they know what I am, what I was. Marshall shook his head. Their briefing file shows you as administrative liaison. 1 combat deployment, Gulf War 1991, 6 months. That is what your official record states. So they will see an old woman playing at soldier. They will see what everyone sees until it is too late to matter, Marshall said. Which, if I remember your tactics from El Salvador, is exactly how you prefer it. Despite everything, despite the tumor and the exhaustion and the 41 years of carrying her father's promise like a stone, she smiled. It was a thin smile, sharp as a blade. The SEALs, she said. What are their names? Marshall pulled out another sheet. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Mitchell, call sign Hawk. Team leader, 36 years old. Son of an Army colonel who commanded a battalion in Desert Storm. Smart, aggressive, suffers from what we might call technological overconfidence. He continued through to the roster. Senior Chief Marcus Washington, call sign Steel. Heavy weapons specialist, 38, veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, 14 years in the teams. Chief Petty Officer David O'Brien, call sign Priest. Medic, deeply religious, tends to see the humanity in the enemy, which makes him both compassionate and occasionally hesitant. Petty Officer Jackson Reyes, call sign Tech. Communications and drone operations, 27 years old, represents the next generation of warfare. Then Brennan, Simmons, Vasquez, good men, capable men. Men who have never fought an enemy, who remembers when their grandfathers lost a war, Claire added quietly. Marshall closed the folders. You leave in 12 hours. C-17 to Bagram, then rotary wing to Phoebe Chapman. The SEALs are already in country, running final preparation. She stood, joints protesting. The tumor sent a spike of pain through her skull that she had learned to breathe through without showing. And when I get there and they ignore everything I say because I am old and female and supposedly just a paper pusher, then men will die, Marshall said flatly, just like the 3 teams before them. The question is whether you can keep that number smaller than it would be without you there. She picked up both folders, the official lie and the classified truth. The weight of paper, the weight of years, the weight of 7 names she whispered every night before sleep, if sleep came. At the door, she paused. Jim, do you know why they called me Shepherd in El Salvador? Marshall shook his head. Because I brought the flock home, she said. 22 out of 29. That is a better ratio than most. But the 7 I lost, they are the ones I count. They are the ones who count. She left him sitting in that underground room, surrounded by secrets that would never see daylight. In her quarters that night, she packed with the efficiency of someone who had deployed more times than official records showed. The bag was light. She had learned long ago that the things you truly needed could not be carried in a rucksack. From her footlocker, she withdrew a small wooden box. Inside, on a bed of faded green felt, lay 7 pieces of paper. Each bore a name written in her own hand, along with a date and a set of coordinates. The places where those men had fallen. The places where she had left them because staying would have meant losing everyone. She held the box for a long moment, then placed it back in the footlocker. If she did not return from Afghanistan, Whoever cleared her quarters would find it and wonder. Let them wonder. Some debts could not be explained, only carried. Before dawn, she stood in front of the mirror and tied her gray hair into a tight bun. She studied the face looking back. Lines etched deep by sun and stress. Eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. A body that was failing by degrees. Cells turning traitor. Time claiming what bullets had missed. She put on the uniform, not combat fatigues yet, service uniform for the flight. The patches were minimal. No Special Forces tab, though she had earned it. No combat infantry badge, though she had bled for it. Just her rank, her name tape, Donnelly. At the base of her locker, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was her rifle. Not the standard issue M4 carbine that the Army preferred now. This was an M110 semi-automatic sniper system, modified to her specifications over years of use. She had carried variations of this weapon since El Salvador, when it had been an M21, and she had learned that in ambush country, the ability to reach out and touch someone at 700 meters often meant the difference between walking home and being carried. She assembled it with the muscle memory of decades, each piece fitting into place with the certainty of ritual. Stock, lower receiver, upper receiver, bolt carrier, scope, suppressor. When it was complete, she held it across her lap and closed her eyes. "Dad," she whispered to the empty room, to the ghost that never left, "I am going to try one more time. I am going to bring them home. All of them." The rifle had no answer. The dead never did. The C-17 Globemaster was a cathedral of noise and cold. Claire sat in the red nylon web seating that lined the fuselage, surrounded by pallets of supplies being ferried to the shrinking American footprint in Afghanistan. The plane was nearly empty of personnel, just her, a logistics officer who slept through the entire flight, and two contractors who spoke quietly in the back about security jobs in Dubai after the withdrawal completed. She did not sleep. She had not slept properly in years. Instead, she studied the briefing materials again under the dim cargo lights, committing terrain to memory, looking for the patterns beneath the patterns. Khost province sat in eastern Afghanistan, pressed against the Pakistani border, where the Duran line was more suggestion than boundary. The terrain was brutal, all vertical relief and hidden valleys. The kind of country where a company of men could disappear into the folds of earth and never be seen again. The Soviets had learned that lesson at terrible cost in the 1980s. The Americans, it seemed, were determined to learn it again. The ambush sites from the three missing teams formed a pattern that made her jaw tighten. Whoever was running operations against American forces in this sector was not just competent, they were intimate with the terrain. They knew where Americans would go, how they would move, what technology they would rely on. They knew because they had fought Americans before or had been taught by those who had. She pulled out a separate document that Marshall had included, classified above the main briefing. It was a partial translation of intercepted communications. The speaker's identity was unknown, but the voice analysis suggested a male, late 60s native Russian speaker. The translation was fragmentary, but one phrase repeated, "The shepherd comes. Old wolf knows old wolf." Her hands went still on the paper. There were not many Russian advisors from the Soviet era still active. Most were dead, killed in Chechnya, or retired to obscurity. Those who remained were either mercenaries or true believers, men for whom the Cold War had never ended, men who saw every conflict as a continuation of the Great Game. But there was one name that haunted her from El Salvador. One opponent who had been her mirror image on the other side, advising the FMLN fighters while she advised the government forces. They had faced each other across jungle clearings and mountain passes for 4 years, never meeting but always aware of each other's presence. Colonel Dmitry Volkov, Spetsnaz, GRU, a man who had fought in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1984, learning the terrain with his blood before being rotated to Central America to teach insurgents how to kill Americans. In 1986, her team had ambushed a convoy moving supplies to FMLN positions. When the smoke cleared and they searched the vehicles, they found intelligence materials and a Spetsnaz field manual with a name written inside, D. Volkov. They had captured one of his men, wounded, defiant. Through an interpreter, the captured soldier had spoken of Volkov with something approaching reverence. "He studies you," the man had said. "He knows how you move. He says you are skilled. He says one day you will face each other without soldiers between you, and then truth will emerge. 3 months later, Claire's team had been ambushed, not by FMLN irregulars, but by a professional unit using Soviet small unit tactics. The ambush had been perfect, a killing box with interlocking fields of fire. She had ordered her 9-person team to split. She took the 2 wounded and ran east, drawing fire. The 7 others, led by a Salvadoran sergeant named Carlos, were supposed to flank south and break contact. She had heard the gunfire for 7 minutes, then silence. By the time she got the wounded to safety and returned with reinforcements, there were only bodies. 7 of them, arranged in a line, weapons placed beside them, a Russian language note pinned to Carlos's chest. The shepherd who abandons the flock. We meet again. Wolf to wolf. It was signed with a single letter, V. She had never told anyone about the note. She had burned it, along with any trace that Volkov had been there. Some shames were too deep for official reports. Now, 38 years later, flying through darkness toward Afghanistan, she wondered if that old wolf was waiting for her again. If this entire operation was not about drones or interpreters, but about finishing a duel that had been interrupted by time and distance. The C-17's engines changed pitch as they began descent into Bagram. Through the small window, she could see the Hindu Kush mountains painted silver by moonlight, beautiful and merciless, like so much of this world. She closed the briefing folders and closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. It never did when the count of 7 started whispering in her mind. Carlos, Miguel, Jose, Antonio, Fernando, Raul, Diego. And now she was being asked to shepherd 6 more young men into mountains where an old enemy might be waiting with old scores to settle. The plane touched down with a jolt that rattled through her spine. She gathered her gear with practiced efficiency. The M110 went into a hard case, her ruck packed light. A small medical kit she had assembled herself, not trusting supply chains. Welcome to Bagram, a bored Air Force sergeant said as the ramp lowered, revealing the sprawl of the airbase at dawn. Mountains rose in every direction, purple shadows giving way to gray stone as the sun touched their peaks. She had been here before, in different wars under different flags. The terrain did not change, only the names of the dead. A Humvee waited on the tarmac, engine running. The driver was young, maybe 23, with the particular wariness that came from too many convoys and not enough sleep. Master Sergeant Donnelly, he asked, pronouncing it wrong, emphasis on the first syllable instead of the second. She nodded, loading her gear into the back. The ride to the helicopter pad was short, through rows of containerized housing units in vehicle parks. The base had the feeling of a place already half abandoned, the drawdown evident in empty spaces where equipment had been. They are waiting at Chapman, the driver said, making conversation to fill the silence. The SEAL team. Heard they are pretty high speed. She did not respond. High speed, low drag was the phrase young operators used, proud of their elite status. She had learned that speed without wisdom just got you killed faster. The MH-60 Black Hawk pilot was older, maybe 40, with the steady calm of someone who had flown enough missions to know that routine was a lie. Master Sergeant, he greeted her. Bit of weather over the mountains so it might get bumpy. We will be at Chapman in 40 mics. She strapped in, checking the 5-point harness twice. The crew chief handed her a headset so she could hear over the rotor noise. As they lifted off, Bagram fell away beneath them, the base with its illusion of safety and order. Beyond the wire was the real Afghanistan, villages of mud brick compounds, terraced fields carved into impossible slopes, dry riverbeds that would rage with snowmelt in spring, and in every fold of terrain, the possibility of men with rifles and patience. The helicopter flew low, hugging the contours of the land, using the terrain to mask their approach from potential threats. Claire watched through the open door as the world tilted and swayed. The door gunner sat behind his M240, scanning the ground below with the vigilance of someone who knew that complacency killed. 30 years I have been flying these routes, the pilot's voice crackled in her headset. Still never gets old, still never gets routine. That is because the moment you think it is routine, she replied, that is when they kill you. He laughed, but it was the laugh of someone who knew she was right. They crossed ridge lines where snow still clung to the shaded faces. They passed over compounds where goats scattered at the sound of rotors. They flew through air so thin and cold that breathing felt like inhaling knives. Forward Operating Base Chapman came into view as a scar of brown against the gray landscape. HESCO barriers and guard towers. A short runway, scattered buildings that were half buried against the wind, and the mortars that sometimes fell in the night. The Black Hawk flared hard, nose up, bleeding speed. The skids touched with barely a bump. Professional. The crew chief tapped her shoulder and pointed to the terminal building where a small group of men waited. Even from a distance, she could identify them. The particular bearing of special operations. The way they stood apart from regular Army personnel. The confidence that came from being told you were the best until you believed it. She unstrapped and gathered her gear. The rotors were still turning, whipping dust into devils that danced across the tarmac. As she walked toward them, rifle case in one hand and ruck in the other, she could see them assessing her. The gray hair, the age lines, the fact that she was female in a profession that still treated that as exceptional. One of them, taller than the rest with the bearing of command, stepped forward. He was precisely as the file described, 36 years old, broad-shouldered, beard groomed to regulation length, which meant barely regulation at all. His eyes were hard and evaluating. "Master Sergeant Donnelly," he said, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone being polite while harboring skepticism. "Lieutenant Commander Ryan Mitchell, welcome to Chapman." She set her gear down and extended her hand. He shook it, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Testing." "Call me Shepard," she said. "Everyone does." Behind Mitchell, the other operators exchanged glances. She could read their body language as clearly as a briefing document. The big one with the saw machine gun was Steele, skeptical but willing to wait. The medic with the cross on a chain outside his shirt was Priest, measuring her with curiosity rather than dismissal. The young one with the tablet already out was Tech, barely hiding his contempt for anything that did not have a battery. "We were told ISA was sending a liaison," Mitchell said. The word liaison carried weight, and not the good kind. "Honestly, Master Sergeant, we are not clear why. This is a direct action mission. We have our protocols. I am here to make sure you come home," Claire said simply. "No offense, ma'am," the big one said, stepping forward slightly. "Steele, Senior Chief Marcus Washington. But we have been doing this for a while. We know how to operate in country." She met his eyes without challenge, without backing down. "How many ambushes have you survived, Senior Chief?" He blinked, caught off guard. "In total, maybe 8, 10 in my career." 31, she said quietly. 31 ambushes. Different war, same mountains, same enemy tactics. So when I tell you that the route you are planning to take into Coast Province is a kill box, I am speaking from experience that none of you have. The group went quiet. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "We have satellite coverage, thermal imaging, drone reconnaissance, all of which can be deceived by someone who knows you are watching," Claire replied. She pulled out a map, the old-fashioned paper kind, and spread it on the hood of a nearby Humvee. "The route you have planned follows the path of least resistance, natural for mechanized movement, which is why it will be the most heavily targeted." Tech, the young one, could not help himself. "With respect, ma'am, your file says 1 deployment. Gulf War, 6 months, that was 30 years ago. Technology has advanced." She looked at him, really looked, seeing his confidence, his youth, his absolute certainty that the tools he carried made him invincible. "Technology is a crutch," she said. "When that crutch breaks, and it will break, what you have left is terrain reading and tactical intuition. How is yours?" Before he could answer, Priest stepped forward. The medic. "Ma'am, we were told you have intelligence about enemy patterns. Can you brief us on that?" Smart, she thought, redirecting toward mission instead of ego. She pointed to the map. 3 teams before you went dark in this area. Their routes, their timing, their procedures all followed standard SOPs. Predictable. The enemy in this sector is not militia. They are being advised by someone with professional military training, specifically Soviet-era training. "Soviet?" Mitchell said. "As in the USSR that collapsed 30 years ago?" "The advisors did not collapse," Claire said. "They adapted. This area was heavily contested during the Soviet occupation in the 80s. Some of those advisors are still alive, still active, and they remember every lesson they learned about fighting in these mountains." "You are talking about old men," Tech said. "Old men who have been killing young men like you for 40 years, she replied without heat. "Age is not weakness in this profession. It is accumulated knowledge paid for in blood." Mitchell crossed his arms. "So what do you propose?" She traced an alternate route on the map. "Longer, harder, more vertical climb. We go high, stay off the valley floors. Move at night, hole up during day, slow and methodical instead of fast and aggressive. That adds 8 hours to our timeline, Mitchell objected. We have a narrow window for this extraction. Better late than dead, Claire said. The air between them crackled with tension. This was the moment. Either he would pull rank, dismiss her, and they would follow the plan that 3 previous teams had followed into oblivion. Or he would consider that maybe, just maybe, the old woman with the classified past knew something worth hearing. It was Priest who broke the standoff. Sir, recommendation we at least hear the full brief. If nothing else, her analysis of enemy patterns might help us refine our approach. Mitchell looked at his medic, then back at Claire. His jaw worked as he weighed command prerogative against tactical prudence. Fine, he said finally. We brief in 30 mics. Bring your analysis. We will evaluate it. It was a small victory, possibly meaningless, but it was a foot in the door. She gathered her gear and followed them into the operations center, a prefab building with map boards and communication equipment. As she set up her materials, she could feel them watching her, evaluating, judging. Let them judge. She had not come here to win popularity contests. She had come to keep a promise made 41 years ago to a dying man who whispered 7 names. Bring them home, all of them. The room smelled of coffee and testosterone and the particular anticipation that came before operations. 6 men who believed they were invincible. 1 woman who knew better. She began her brief laying out the ambush patterns, the tactical signatures, the probability matrices that all pointed to one conclusion. Someone very skilled and very patient was waiting in those mountains. Whether they would listen was another question entirely. The briefing lasted 40 minutes, but the decision was made in the first 5. Claire could see it in Mitchell's eyes, the way they glazed slightly when she talked about Soviet doctrine and ambush patterns from wars he had studied in history books, but never felt in his bones. She could see it in Tech's barely concealed smirk when she pointed to paper maps instead of pulling up satellite imagery. She could see it in the polite patience of men who had already decided what they would do and were simply waiting for the old woman to finish talking so they could get on with it. Only 2 sets of eyes remained engaged. Steele, the heavy weapons specialist, leaned forward when she described the herringbone ambush layout, recognizing something in the pattern that matched his own experience in Helmand Province. And Priest, the medic, watched her face more than her maps, reading something in the lines around her eyes that spoke of costs paid in currency these younger men had not yet spent. When she finished, Mitchell stood. He thanked her with the precise courtesy of an officer who had been raised to respect elders even when dismissing their counsel. We appreciate the historical context, Master Sergeant. We will take your concerns under advisement as we finalize our operational plan. Which meant they would do exactly what they had planned from the beginning. She gathered her maps without comment. There was no point in argument. Some lessons could only be learned through blood, and she had long ago accepted that wisdom was a commodity no one wanted to buy until the price of ignorance became unbearable. As the team filed out to conduct final equipment checks, Steele lingered. He moved with the particular economy of large men who had learned to be graceful through necessity, his bulk disguising the speed that made him effective with a squad automatic weapon. Ma'am, he said quietly, waiting until the others were out of earshot, that business about 31 ambushes. That true? She met his eyes. The question was not challenge, but genuine curiosity. Every one of them, senior chief, different country, different enemy, same mountains, same mistakes. He nodded slowly, processing. The route the LT wants to take, you really think it is a kill box? I know it is, she said, because I have seen this pattern before. The enemy is hurting you. Each ambush site from the previous teams pushed survivors north and east, funneling them toward terrain that favors defense over assault. Classic Soviet methodology. Create the illusion of safe corridors, then collapse them when commitment is complete. And if we go your route, the high country, you arrive exhausted, 12 hours behind schedule, but alive. She paused, then added, probably alive. There are no guarantees in this work. Only calculated risks versus certain death. Steele absorbed this, his jaw working beneath his beard. Why did you take this mission, ma'am? If you do not mind me asking. File says you are terminal. Could be anywhere right now except here. The question touched something raw. She looked past him, through the dirty window to where the mountains rose like ancient witnesses. Because I made a promise a long time ago to bring everyone home. I have kept that promise 22 times. Failed it 7 times. The math haunts me. 7, Steele repeated softly. That is the number you mentioned in the brief, the ones you lost in El Salvador. Their names are carved in my head deeper than any headstone, Claire said. I hear them every night before sleep. Carlos, Miguel, Jose, Antonio, Fernando, Raul, Diego, 22, 25, 34, 19, 28, 21, 23. Those were their ages. Boys pretending to be soldiers because someone told them that was patriotism. She turned back to face him. I am 62 years old, Senior Chief. I have maybe 18 months left before my lungs stop working. I can spend that time in a hospital bed, or I can spend it trying to balance a ledger that will never balance. This is my choice. What is yours? He straightened slightly, coming to a decision she could see forming behind his eyes. I will talk to the LT. Maybe we can compromise. Take some of your route, keep some of ours. It was more than she had expected. Small victories. She nodded. Do what you can. I will be ready either way. After he left, she sat alone in the briefing room, surrounded by maps that told stories these young operators could not yet read. The terrain was a language, and she was fluent in its grammar of death. Every ridgeline was a sentence, every valley a paragraph describing how men died when they stopped respecting the ground beneath their feet. She pulled out a small notebook, worn leather covers soft from years of handling. Inside, written in her own careful script, were the after-action reports she had never filed. The true accounting of El Salvador. Not the sanitized version that went into official records, but the raw inventory of failure and survival. Mission 17, she read, dated April 1985. Ambush at Rio Sapo. 9 personnel, split element maneuver. Enemy force estimated 2 platoons, dug in, supporting fire from elevated positions. Decision, withdraw under covering fire. Result, all personnel extracted, 3 wounded, none fatal. Note, Carlos exhibited exceptional leadership under fire. Recommended for promotion. Mission 32, dated August 1987. The last entry, the one that ended her time in El Salvador and began her 40-year penance. The words blurred as she read them, not from tears, but from having read them so many times the ink had started to fade from the oils of her fingertips. Convoy ambush, main supply route near Morazan. 9 personnel plus interpreter. Enemy force unknown, estimated company strength. Complex ambush, L-shaped, supporting mortars. 2 wounded critically, leg and chest trauma. Decision, split force. Shepherd element with 2 wounded extracted east. 7-person element, under Sergeant Carlos Mendoza ordered to flank south and break contact. She had written what came next in a different pen, days later, when her hands stopped shaking enough to hold one. 7 KIA. Recovered bodies showed execution-style wounds. Note pinned to Sergeant Mendoza, the shepherd who abandons the flock. We meet again, wolf to wolf, signed V. Volkov, the name she had not spoken aloud in 38 years. The Soviet advisor who had been her shadow opponent throughout that dirty little war. They had never met face to face, but they had studied each other through the aftermath of firefights, through captured documents, through the terrible intimacy of trying to kill each other's students. He had known her call sign, had known her tactics, had crafted that final ambush specifically to force her into the choice no leader should face: save the wounded and abandon the healthy, or stay together and lose everyone. She had chosen. The choice had been tactically correct, strategically sound, mathematically optimal. And it had been morally unforgivable. The notebook had other entries, other missions, but she could not read them now. The weight of 7 names pressed too heavy. She closed the cover and returned it to her pocket next to her heart, where it rested like a stone. Outside, the sun climbed toward noon. The base moved with the purposeful chaos of a military installation preparing for operations. Helicopters spun up and settled. Convoys departed through the main gate in clouds of dust. Soldiers moved between buildings with a particular trudge of people who had been at war so long they could not remember what peace felt like. Claire found her assigned quarters in a containerized housing unit that smelled of industrial cleaner and other people's sweat. The metal walls radiated cold. A single bunk, a wall locker, a folding chair, luxury compared to some places she had slept. She unpacked her ruck with methodical care. Clothing rolled tight, medical supplies in waterproof bags. Ammunition organized by caliber and purpose. The M110 rifle came out of its case and received the attention of a religious ritual. She field stripped it completely, inspecting each component, cleaning surfaces that were already clean, reassembling with the muscle memory of decades. When the rifle was ready, she loaded 7 magazines, 20 rounds each, 140 rounds total. She had learned long ago that running out of ammunition was a failure of planning, not luck. From the bottom of her ruck, she withdrew a small wooden box no bigger than a deck of cards. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were 7 spent shell casings, brass, 7.62 millimeter. Each one marked with a date and a name in fine point marker. She had fired these rounds in El Salvador, one for each of the men she could not save. After she had recovered their bodies and sent them home to families who would never fully understand how they died, she had gone to the range and fired 7 shots into the earth. One for each name, a memorial that only she would know. Now she laid them out on the small table in her quarters, arranging them in a line. 7 golden sentinels, 7 ghosts made manifest in brass. "If I do not come back," she whispered to them, to the memory of the men they represented, "then I tried. If I do come back, I will have done what you could not. Lived. Maybe that is enough. Maybe it never will be." The casings offered no answer, but then she had stopped expecting answers years ago. The dead were silent. It was the living who screamed. A knock at her door pulled her from the meditation. She gathered the casings quickly, returning them to their box, their hiding place. Steele stood in the doorway, filling the frame. Behind him, the sun painted long shadows across the compound. "Ma'am," he said, "LT wants to see you. Got a compromise on the route." She followed him through the compound to a secure room where Mitchell had spread a new map across a table. The rest of the team was there. 6 faces, 6 different expressions ranging from skepticism to curiosity. Mitchell did not waste time on pleasantries. "Senior Chief made some good points about your concerns. We have reviewed the intelligence you provided. There are patterns we had not fully appreciated." It was as close to an admission of error as a SEAL officer would make in front of his team. Claire nodded, accepting it. "Here is the compromise," Mitchell continued, tracing a line on the map. "We take your high route for the initial insertion and the first 8 clicks of movement. Keeps us out of the valley floors where the previous teams were hit. But once we reach this ridge line, we drop down to the primary route. Saves us 6 hours and gets us to the objective before the window closes on the drone recovery." Claire studied the map. The compromise gave them some protection, but not enough. The drop point into the valley was still a natural choke point, still predictable. But it was better than the original plan, and she had learned long ago that perfect was the enemy of good enough. "What about the drone site itself?" she asked. "Do we have current imagery?" Tech stepped forward, tablet in hand. 60 hours old but clear. "The RQ-170 impacted here," he indicated a spot on the map, in a natural bowl surrounded by elevated terrain. "Recovery should be straightforward. Get in, pull the hard drive, destroy the airframe, exfil." "Straightforward," Claire repeated, the word every soldier used before everything went wrong. "Do we have any intelligence on enemy presence in that sector?" "Negative," Mitchell said. "Thermal shows cold. No radio traffic, no visual confirmation of hostiles." "Which means they are dug in and waiting," Claire said. "Not a question. A statement of tactical reality. Or it means there is no one there and we are being overcautious," Tech countered. He still carried the edge of youth, the belief that technology could reveal all secrets. "Senior Chief," Claire said, turning to Steele, "you have been in country longer than anyone here. Does the enemy in this region use thermal discipline?" Steele nodded slowly. "Yeah, they have learned. Use cold cells, stay underground during drone coverage, move at night without heat sources. The smart ones are very hard to find." "So the absence of thermal signatures proves nothing," Claire said to Tech. "It might mean safety. It might mean a trap sophisticated enough to deceive your sensors." The young man bristled, but held his tongue. Mitchell intervened. "We go with the assumption that it is contested, full tactical protocols. Overwatch established before anyone approaches the drone. We do this by the book." "Good," Claire said. "And I want to be part of the Overwatch element. My rifle has the range to cover the recovery team from distance." Mitchell considered this. "You are liaison, not direct action." "I am a sniper," Claire corrected. "My official role is liaison. My actual skill set is putting rounds on target at 700 meters. Use me for what I am, not what the paperwork says." There was a moment of calculation in Mitchell's eyes. Then he nodded. Fine. You are with Steele on Overwatch. Priest and Brennan on the recovery element. Tech stays with me at the command position. Simmons and Vasquez on security perimeter. It was a solid plan. Not perfect, but solid. They would find out soon enough if solid was sufficient. The briefing continued for another hour, working through contingencies and communication protocols. Claire noted that Mitchell ran a tight team. He listened to his men, incorporated their input, made decisions with confidence, even when the information was incomplete. He had the makings of a good commander, if he lived long enough to season the arrogance with wisdom. When they broke, Priest approached her. The medic had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen suffering and responded with compassion rather than hardening. Ma'am, he said quietly, can I ask you something personal? She nodded, sensing this would not be about tactics. The cancer, he said. How bad is it? Direct. She appreciated that. Bad enough that I am here instead of spending my remaining time with people I love. Which tells you everything about how I have lived my life. Do you have people who love you? The question landed harder than he probably intended. She thought of her mother, dead 15 years now, who had never forgiven her father for choosing the Corps over family and had extended that unforgiveness to her daughter, who made the same choice. She thought of relationships that had withered under the weight of deployments and secrets. She thought of the 7 men whose names she carried and the 22 she had saved, scattered now across the world, living lives she would never know. I have ghosts, she said finally. They are the most faithful companions I have ever known. They never leave. Priest absorbed this with the solemn attention of someone who understood that some wounds had no bandages. I will pray for you, he said, if that is acceptable. Pray for yourself, Claire replied, and for this team. I am past the point where prayer changes anything, but you boys still have futures. Keep them alive, and you will have done God's work better than any chapel service. He smiled at that, sad and knowing. You talk like someone who has already made peace with the end. I made peace with the end in 1987, she said. Everything since has been borrowed time. I am just trying to make sure the interest rate does not bankrupt someone else's account. After he left, she returned to her quarters. The afternoon heat was building, turning the metal container into an oven. She removed her outer shirt, working in just her t-shirt and cargo pants. As she bent to organize her gear, a sharp pain lanced through her chest. Not the dull ache of the tumor, but something acute. She pressed her hand against her sternum, breathing through it. The coughing fit came without warning. Violent, deep, her whole body convulsing with the effort to expel what could not be expelled. She grabbed the edge of the small table to steady herself, her other hand covering her mouth. When it subsided, she looked at her palm. Blood, bright arterial red, more than she had seen before. Not just flecks, but actual volume, pooling in the lines of her hand. She grabbed a towel from her pack and wiped it clean, then wet the towel and scrubbed until no trace remained. Her breathing was ragged, her heart racing. The tumor was progressing faster than the doctors had predicted. Or perhaps the altitude was accelerating the deterioration. Either way, time was shorter than 18 months. Maybe weeks. She sat on the edge of the bunk, feeling the weight of revelation. She could abort now, tell Mitchell she was medically unfit. Go home and die in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that would prolong the ending without improving it. Or she could say nothing. Do the mission. Try to save 6 more men. Die here if that was what it cost. The choice was not difficult. She had made it the moment she accepted the deployment. She changed her shirt, burying the bloody one at the bottom of her ruck where no one would find it. She took 4 more ibuprofen, knowing they would do nothing but taking them anyway because the ritual of self-care was important even when the self was failing. When she emerged from her quarters an hour later, her face was composed, her bearing steady. No one looking at her would know that she had just coughed up enough blood to paint a warning that her body was surrendering. That evening, she tried to sleep. The narrow bunk was uncomfortable, the metal frame digging into her back through the thin mattress. Outside, the compound slowly quieted as evening approached. The temperature dropped. The mountains exhaled cold air that seeped through the walls. Sleep would not come. It rarely did anymore. The tumor pressed against her skull with a dull ache that no amount of ibuprofen could fully suppress. The doctors had offered stronger medication, opioids that would dull the pain, but also dull the edge she needed to stay sharp. She had refused. Better to hurt and be aware than comfortable and slow. In the darkness, she closed her eyes and let memory rise like water. El Salvador, 1987. The jungle thick and green, the air so humid that breathing felt like drowning. She had been 25 years old, embedded with a Salvadoran army unit tasked with interdicting supply lines to FMLN insurgents. Her official role was advisor. Her actual role was everything: tactician, trainer, translator of American doctrine into Spanish, and when necessary, trigger puller. The team she advised had started as strangers. Young men conscripted into a war they barely understood, fighting for a government that saw them as expendable. She had molded them through repetition and respect into something approaching professional soldiers. Not elite, but competent. Not fearless, but willing. Carlos had been the natural leader among them. 34 years old, a farmer before the war, with a wife and 3 children in a village near the Honduran border. He had the quiet authority of a man who had raised crops and livestock, who understood that nature demanded patience and delivered consequences to those who rushed. She had recommended him for sergeant, had taught him small unit tactics, had trusted him with the lives of the others when the situation demanded split operations. The ambush had come at dawn, when the light was gray and flat, shadows still pooling in the low places. Their convoy had been moving supplies from San Salvador to a forward position. 2 trucks, 9 men, standard security protocol. The first indication had been the silence. The jungle was never silent. There were always birds, insects, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. But that morning, the world had held its breath. She had started to call a halt when the road ahead erupted. Command detonated mine. The lead truck lifted and twisted, metal shredding, bodies flung like dolls. She had been in the second truck. The blast wave hit them like a physical blow, spider webbing the windshield. Then the shooting started. From the left, heavy machine gun fire. From the right, rifles on semi-automatic, disciplined and aimed. From ahead, more rifles, the L shape, the killing box. Miguel had been hit in the first seconds. Chest trauma, sucking chest wound. Antonio had taken shrapnel to the leg, femoral artery compromised, blood sheeting across the truck bed. She had grabbed them both, screaming orders in Spanish that were half drowned by gunfire. The others had returned fire, but they were pinned, exposed. The enemy had the high ground, the surprise, the initiative. She had made the call, the terrible mathematics of combat. She could try to hold position with 2 critically wounded and 7 mobile, and they would all die in the next 10 minutes. Or she could split the force, take the wounded and run, drawing fire. Let the mobile element flank and break contact. Carlos had understood immediately. His eyes had met hers through the smoke and chaos. He had nodded once. She had seen it then, the acceptance, the willingness to be the sacrifice so others could live. She had pulled Miguel and Antonio from the truck, half carrying, half dragging them into the jungle while pouring suppressive fire over her shoulder. The sound of her team engaging behind her, Carlos shouting orders in Spanish, the staccato rhythm of AK-47s and M16s. She had made it 200 meters before the weight became too much, had stopped in a small depression where a fallen tree offered cover, had worked on Miguel first, sealing the chest wound, getting his breathing stabilized. Then Antonio, tourniquet high and tight, packing the wound with field dressings that turned red faster than she could apply them. The firing behind her had lasted 7 minutes. She had timed it without meaning to, her internal clock measuring the duration of her team's life. When it stopped, the silence had been worse than the noise. She had left the wounded hidden and marked, had run back toward the ambush site with her rifle up and her heart hammering, had found the convoy destroyed, 7 bodies arranged in a line, weapons beside them, the ritualistic display of an enemy who wanted credit for their kill. Carlos had been in the center, his eyes open to the sky, a single bullet hole in his forehead, execution style, professional. The note had been pinned to his chest with a bayonet, Cyrillic script, Russian. She had pulled it free with shaking hands and read the translation that some part of her brain processed automatically. The shepherd who abandons the flock. We meet again, wolf to wolf, v. Volkov, the ghost advisor she had been hunting for 3 years. He had been there, had planned this, had forced her into the choice and then left his calling card in the bodies of her men. She had burned the note, had never reported its existence, had written the after-action report in the clinical language that military bureaucracy demanded, stripping away the emotion, the guilt, the rage. 7 KIA, tactical withdrawal under fire, mission failure. The words had not captured the truth. They never did. Now, lying in the cold darkness of a housing unit in Afghanistan, 38 years later, she could still see Carlos's face, could still hear the sound of the jungle going silent, could still feel the weight of the choice that had saved 2 lives and cost 7. She reached for the wooden box on the small table beside her bunk, opened it, took out the 7 shell casings and held them in her palm, warm from her body heat, solid, real. "I am sorry," she whispered to them, to the memory of men who could not hear. "I am so goddamn sorry. I did what I was trained to do. I made the tactical call, and it was right, and it was wrong, and I will carry you until the tumor takes me or a bullet does, whichever comes first." The casings had no answer. They never did. She returned them to the box and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. It arrived finally in shallow fits, broken by the ache in her chest, broken by dreams of jungles that became mountains, broken by the faces of 7 men who had trusted her to bring them home. The mission brief came at 0400 hours. The team assembled in the operations center with the particular electricity that preceded deployment. Claire watched them prepare with the eye of someone who had done this too many times. The rituals of checking weapons, adjusting gear, the nervous energy masked as confidence. Mitchell stood before a map board, laser pointer in hand. Insertion at 0200 Zulu via rotary wing. "LZ here," he indicated a ridgeline 5 clicks from the drone site. "We move on foot, high country route per compromise plan. ETA objective area 0600 Zulu. Establish overwatch. Assess situation. Execute recovery if clear. Exfil by 0800 before enemy can organize response." It was a good plan on paper. Most plans were. "Row is weapons tight unless engaged," Mitchell continued. "Rules of engagement. We are not looking for a fight. Get in, get the drive, get out." Claire raised a hand. Mitchell paused, nodded to her. "What is the protocol if the drone is rigged?" she asked. Tech answered. "I can identify most trigger mechanisms. If it is too sophisticated, we abort and call in an airstrike to destroy it in place. And if the enemy engages during recovery, then we defend the position until recovery is complete or we have to abort," Mitchell said. "That is where your overwatch comes in, Master Sergeant. You and Steele keep them off our backs long enough for Priest and Brennan to pull the drive. 700-meter shots in mountain wind with unknown enemy strength," Claire said. "Possible, but not guaranteed. Have we considered alternates?" "The alternates are all worse," Mitchell replied. "This is our best option given the constraints." She nodded. She had said her piece. The rest was execution. They geared up in silence. Claire's kit was lighter than the others. No heavy plates, no breaching equipment. Just rifle, ammunition, water, medical supplies. The bare minimum to stay mobile and effective. Steele approached as she was doing a final check of her weapon. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you good to move in this terrain? No offense, but it is going to be a hard climb." She looked up at him, this big man with concern in his eyes. "I have been climbing mountains since before you were born, Senior Chief. My lungs are compromised, not my legs. I will keep pace." "Fair enough," he said. He held out a hand. "Partners?" She shook it. "Partners, you watch my 6, I watch yours." The weight of that promise settled between them. In this profession, watching someone's 6 was more than tactical positioning. It was trust. It was the acknowledgement that survival was a team effort and failure was shared. The helicopters were waiting on the pad, rotors already turning, the whoop, whoop, whoop of blades cutting the pre-dawn air. 2 MH-60 Blackhawks, crews running through pre-flight checks with practice efficiency. Claire climbed aboard the lead bird, taking a seat near the door gunner. Steele settled beside her, his bulk filling the space. The rest of the team distributed between the 2 aircraft. The crew chief made the rounds, checking harnesses, giving comms checks. Everyone received a thumbs up. Everyone was ready as they would ever be. The helicopter lifted with a lurch that pulled at her stomach. The base fell away beneath them. Lights became pinpricks. The mountains rose ahead, dark shapes against the sky, just beginning to gray with approaching dawn. She plugged into the internal comms and heard the pilot's voice. 30 mics to LZ. Weather is clear, winds moderate. Intel says we have a clean approach. Intel is often wrong, she murmured, too quiet for the mic to catch. Steele glanced at her. She met his eyes and saw her own skepticism reflected there. They both knew that clean approaches were rare and getting rarer. The enemy learned, adapted, waited. The flight path took them low, using terrain masking to avoid radar and visual detection. The helicopter banked hard around ridgelines, dropped into valleys, climbed again. The pilots flew with the casual competence of people who had made this run 100 times and knew every rock and canyon. Through the open door, Claire watched Afghanistan slide past, compounds scattered across impossible terrain. Terraced fields carved into mountainsides by generations of farmers, dry riverbeds that would rage with snowmelt in spring, and everywhere the sense of a land that had been at war so long that peace was myth. She had deployed to 7 countries across 4 decades, each one different in language and culture, and the specific reasons men gave for killing each other. Each one the same in the fundamental truth that terrain did not care about politics or ideology. Terrain simply was, and terrain killed those who did not respect it. The helicopter began its descent. The crew chief held up 10 fingers. 10 minutes. Claire checked her rifle one more time. Chamber empty, safety on, magazine seated, scope covers in place, everything as it should be. But her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from anticipation, from the knowledge that in 10 minutes they would be committed. In the air, they could still turn back. On the ground, the only way out was through. 5 minutes. The crew chief's hand signal. She looked at Steele. He was checking his saw, running through his own ritual. Looked at Priest across the cabin, lips moving in silent prayer. Looked at Mitchell, eyes hard and focused, the bearing of command settling over him like armor. Young men going to war, again, always again. She had promised to bring them home. All of them. The math suggested that was unlikely. But math had never stopped her from trying. The helicopter flared hard, nose up, rotors biting air. The skids touched stone with barely a sound. Professional flying. The crew chief tapped her shoulder and pointed to the ramp. Time to go. She unhooked and stepped out into the thin mountain air. The cold hit her like a slap. 4,000 meters elevation. The oxygen was scarce. Her damaged lungs protested immediately. The team moved quickly away from the helicopter, establishing a security perimeter while the birds lifted off and disappeared into the darkness. The sound of rotors faded. Silence rushed back. They were alone now on a ridge in Afghanistan, with a mission that had killed 3 teams before them and an enemy who might be watching from the darkness. Claire dropped to a knee, letting her breathing settle, letting her eyes adjust. The night vision goggles turned the world green and flat. She switched them off, preferring natural vision. Technology had its place, but sometimes the human eye saw things that sensors missed. Mitchell's voice came through the comms, barely above a whisper. Movement in 2 minutes. Shepherd on point. She rose and took the lead, rifle at low ready, moving with the careful steps of someone who understood that the ground itself was the enemy. Each foot placement deliberate, each step tested before committing weight. Behind her, the team followed in staggered column, professional spacing, weapons coverage in overlapping arcs. The ridge stretched before them, a knife edge of stone and scree with 1,000-foot drops on either side. This was the high route she had recommended. Brutal, exhausting, safe only in comparison to the alternatives. They moved through the darkness, 6 men and 1 woman, carrying weapons and secrets and the weight of promises made to the dead. Somewhere ahead, the drone waited. Somewhere ahead, the enemy waited. Somewhere ahead, perhaps, an old Russian waited to finish a duel that had begun when both were young. Claire Donnelly climbed toward all of it, her lungs burning, her heart steady, her hands no longer shaking. She had work to do, 7 names to balance with 6 lives saved, if the math would allow it. The ridge was a spine of stone that cut the sky in half. To the east, the first pale light of dawn bled across the horizon, turning the mountains from black to gray to the color of old bone. To the west, darkness still held dominion, the valleys below invisible in shadow so deep it seemed solid. Claire moved along that spine with steps measured in inches rather than feet. Each placement of her boot required calculation. The scree was loose, ready to slide at the slightest provocation, and a slide here meant a tumble that would not stop until the body hit stone 1,000 feet below. Behind her, the team followed in single file, trusting her navigation, trusting her promise that this high route would keep them alive. The altitude pressed against her damaged lungs like a hand squeezing. Each breath was work. Each step required oxygen her body struggled to process. The tumor in her chest was a constant ache now, sharp when she inhaled deeply, dull when she tried to breathe shallow. She had taken 4 ibuprofen an hour ago. They were doing nothing. But she did not slow, could not slow. The team was watching, measuring, deciding whether the old woman could actually do what she claimed. Trust was earned in moments like this, proved in the simple act of not failing when failure would be easy. Mitchell's voice came through the comms, quiet as wind. "Shepard, how much farther on this goat trail before we can descend to the primary route?" She paused, consulting the mental map she had built from studying the terrain. 2 clicks, maybe 3. "There is a saddle ahead where the ridge broadens. We can reassess there." "Copy." Mitchell's tone carried the tension of a commander second-guessing his decision to defer to someone else's judgment. "We are burning time." "Better to burn time than bodies," she replied, then continued moving before he could argue. Steele was directly behind her, his breathing heavy but controlled. The big man carried nearly 100 pounds of gear, including his squad automatic weapon, but he moved with surprising grace, his bulk an asset in terrain that punished the unsteady. Every few steps, he would glance back to ensure the rest of the team maintained spacing. The sky continued its slow brightening. Detail emerged from shadow. The mountains revealed themselves in layers, near peaks sharp and clear, distant ranges fading to blue-gray silhouettes. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, indifferent to human presence, ancient beyond comprehension. They had been moving for 90 minutes when Claire saw it, a disturbance in the scree ahead, too regular to be natural. She raised a closed fist, the universal signal for halt. The team froze. She moved forward alone, rifle up, scanning through her scope. The disturbance resolved into a pattern. Rocks had been moved, stacked deliberately, then camouflaged with smaller stones and dust. A cairn of sorts, but not for marking trails, for marking something else. She knelt beside it and carefully began removing stones. 6 inches down, her fingers touched metal. Cold, smooth. She cleared more debris and exposed the object fully. A Soviet RGD-5 hand grenade, olive drab paint faded by decades but still recognizable. The pin had been removed. The spoon was held in place by the weight of the stones. Move the stones carelessly and the grenade would detonate. She sat back on her heels, studying the device. This was not a Taliban weapon. The RGD-5 had not been manufactured since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. This grenade was older than some of the men on this team, which meant someone had been carrying it for 30 years or more, saving it, waiting for the right moment to use it. Steele had moved up beside her, silent as smoke for such a large man. He looked at the grenade, then at her face. "Soviet era," she confirmed quietly. "Pressure release trigger. We almost walked right into it." "How did you see it?" "The rocks look natural." "Because I have seen this before," she said. "El Salvador." The Soviet advisors taught the insurgents to booby-trap likely routes. They used natural materials to hide man-made triggers. It is very effective against soldiers who trust their eyes more than their instincts. She pulled a length of paracord from her kit and carefully threaded it through the grenade's pinhole, securing the spoon. Only when she was certain it could not detonate did she lift the stones away and render it safe. Mitchell had moved forward, the rest of the team holding position. His face was tight with controlled anger. "You are telling me there are decades-old Soviet traps up here?" "I am telling you that someone who knows Soviet doctrine has prepared this route," Claire said. "This grenade is a marker. It tells me we are on the right path, which means it is exactly the path they expect us to avoid. The valley route would have been faster but more obviously dangerous. This high route appears safer, so they have seeded it with surprises." She stood, her knees protesting. "From here forward, we move even more carefully. Watch for disturbances, unnatural angles, anything that looks like it was placed rather than fell. This is going to take forever," Tech said from his position back in the line. "We will miss the operational window." "Then we miss it and come back tomorrow," Claire replied. "Better late than scattered across this mountain in pieces too small to recover." Mitchell's jaw worked as he calculated odds and options. Finally, he nodded. "Shepard has the point. Everyone else, eyes open. We move at whatever pace keeps us intact." They continued, slower now. Each step a negotiation with terrain that had been weaponized by patience and expertise. Claire found 2 more traps in the next kilometer. One was a tripwire connected to a rockfall trigger that would have sent tons of stone down on anyone below. The other was a deadfall, a carefully balanced boulder that waited for the vibration of footsteps to send it rolling. She marked each with a small pile of stones, both to warn the team and to catalog the mine she was facing. Because these traps were not random, they were teaching tools, each one slightly more sophisticated than the last. Each one designed to train as well as kill. Volkov, she thought, you are still teaching, still preparing students, still fighting the war that never ended for you. The saddle Mitchell had asked about appeared ahead, a broadening of the ridge where ancient avalanche debris had created something approaching flat ground. It was large enough for the team to gather, large enough to rest, large enough to make decisions. It was also large enough to be a kill zone. Claire stopped 50 meters short and studied the saddle through her scope. The ground showed no obvious disturbance. The rocks were scattered naturally. There was good cover from multiple angles. It was, by every tactical measure, an ideal position, which made her deeply suspicious. She scanned the heights above and to either side of the saddle, looking for hide sites, looking for positions where a patient enemy could wait with a rifle or a radio detonator. The scope revealed nothing but rock and shadow. But absence of evidence was not evidence of absence. She had learned that lesson written in the blood of 7 men. Mitchell came forward. That is the saddle. Good position to rest and refit before the descent. Too good, Claire said. If I were planning an ambush, I would let my enemy climb to exhaustion on a difficult route, then hit them when they stop to rest in the only obvious position. Maximum psychological impact. They think they are safe, then they die. You think every piece of terrain is a trap, Tex said, frustration bleeding through. Maybe sometimes flat ground is just flat ground. Maybe, Claire agreed, but I have been wrong before and people died. I will not make that mistake again. She turned to Mitchell. We bypass the saddle, stay high on the right side, use the broken ground for cover. It adds another hour, but it keeps us off the X. The X being the point of ambush, the spot where kill zones converged, the place marked in blood on maps that only survivors could read. Mitchell looked at his men. They were tired. The altitude and the careful movement had drained them. Rest would be tactically sound, but rest in the wrong place would be fatal. He made his decision. We go around. Shepard's call. The relief Claire felt was physical, a loosening of tension she had not fully acknowledged. She had half expected him to overrule her, to choose speed over caution. That he trusted her judgment now meant something. Small victories. They accumulated like coins until you had enough to buy another day of life. They skirted the saddle, staying in the jumbled rocks to the right, moving in bounds with Overwatch. It was slow, it was exhausting, it was professional, and it saved their lives. They were halfway past when Claire saw the wire. It was thin, nearly invisible, strung ankle height across a gap between 2 boulders. She froze, fist up, team halting behind her. The wire ran uphill to the left, disappearing into a crevice. She followed the line with her eyes and saw them. 3 artillery shells, Soviet vintage, probably 122 millimeter, buried in the scree above the saddle. They were positioned to create an avalanche when detonated. Anyone resting in that perfect flat space would have been buried under tons of rock and high explosive. She pointed them out to Mitchell. His face went pale beneath his tan. Jesus, he whispered. Steele moved up to look. That would have killed us all. Buried so deep there would be nothing to recover. And it would have looked like natural rockfall if anyone investigated, Claire added. Clever, economical, deniable. She pulled out her camera and photographed the setup. Intelligence would want this. Evidence of sophisticated enemy preparation. Proof that someone with professional military engineering knowledge was operating in this sector. But more than that, it was confirmation. Volkov was here, or someone trained by him. The signature was too precise to be coincidence. The team moved past the wire with exaggerated care, each man hyper-aware of where he placed his feet. The saddle lay empty below them, a beautiful trap that would have closed on men too tired to question their good fortune. Beyond the saddle, the terrain changed. The ridge descended in a series of broken shelves, each one requiring careful climbing. The sun was fully up now, and with it came heat that made the cold night seem like memory. Claire's uniform was soaked with sweat despite the altitude. Salt stung her eyes. Her hands left damp prints on the rocks she used for balance. The coughing fit hit her without warning. One moment she was climbing, the next her lungs spasmed, trying to expel something that could not be expelled. She turned away from the team, one hand braced against stone, the other covering her mouth as her body tried to tear itself apart from the inside. When it passed, there was blood on her hand, more than before. Bright red, arterial, the color of flowers and flags and everything that marked the boundary between life and death. She wiped it on her pants, trying to be casual, but Priest had seen. The medic's eyes were sharp, trained to notice the signs of trauma. He moved to her position. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "let me check you." "I am fine," she said, "just the altitude." "That is not altitude," Priest replied. "That is hemoptysis. You are bleeding into your lungs." "How long has this been happening?" "Since before I deployed," Claire admitted. "It is the cancer. Tumor is pressing on blood vessels. The doctor said it would get worse." "You should not be at an altitude," Priest said, professional concern overriding protocol. "This could kill you faster than any bullet." "Everything can kill me faster than anything else," she replied. "The question is not whether I die. The question is whether I do something useful before I do." Priest studied her face, reading something there that made him nod slowly. "I will pray for you." "Pray for yourself," she said again, the same response she had given before. "You still have time for prayers to matter." They continued the descent. The mission timeline was blown. They were 4 hours behind schedule. The drone site was still 3 kilometers ahead. The operational window for recovery was closing. Mitchell called a halt on a narrow ledge that offered some cover from above. He gathered the team in close, voices low. "We have a decision to make," he said. "We are way behind schedule. The drone site will be exposed in full daylight. If we proceed, we lose the advantage of darkness. If we turn back, we scrub the mission and the intel is lost." "What does intel say about enemy activity in this time frame?" Steele asked. "Nothing current," Tech replied. "Last satellite pass was 18 hours ago. Showed clear. But that does not mean much." Claire spoke up. "If we proceed in daylight, we are exposed on the approach. Every step will be visible to anyone watching from the heights. We would need perfect overwatch and perfect execution." "Can you provide that?" Mitchell asked, looking at her directly. "I can engage targets at 700 meters," she said, "but I cannot be everywhere at once. If they hit you from multiple angles simultaneously, I can suppress one position. Maybe 2, not 3 or 4. "So we are walking into a potential ambush with degraded advantages," Mitchell summarized. He looked at each team member in turn. "This is not a command decision. This is a team vote. We go or we turn back." Simmons spoke first. The quiet one, rear security, a man who had survived 4 deployments by being careful. "I say we turn back. Live to fight another day." Vasquez, the other junior man, nodded agreement. "The risk is too high for the gain." Tech surprised at everyone. "I say we go. We came all this way. The intel matters. If we turn back, 3 teams went dark for nothing." Brennan, the breacher, was torn. His hands flexed on his rifle. "I do not know. What does Shepard think?" All eyes turned to Claire, the old woman who had saved them from 3 traps. The one whose judgment had kept them alive when doctrine would have killed them. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking through scenarios, calculating odds, remembering the weight of 7 names and what it cost to live when others died. Finally, she spoke. "I think you should turn back. The tactical situation is compromised. The enemy has prepared this ground too well. Every advantage belongs to them." Mitchell's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if her vote had given him permission to make the safe call. "But," Claire continued, and the word hung in the air like a blade, "I also think that 3 teams disappeared here, and their families never got answers. I think there is someone in those mountains who needs to know that Americans do not give up just because the path is hard. And I think that sometimes the mission matters more than the men." She met Mitchell's eyes. "I am 62 years old with terminal cancer. My calculus is different from yours. You have wives, children, futures. I have ghosts and months, so I will go forward alone if I have to. You boys can head back with my blessing and no shame." The silence that followed was broken only by wind across rock and the distant cry of a hawk riding thermals. Steele was the one who broke it. "Well," he said, "I did not carry this saw up this mountain just to carry it back down without firing it. I am in." Priest nodded. "Where the shepherd goes, so goes the flock. I am in." Brennan sighed, but there was a smile beneath it. "Guess I am too dumb to quit now." In. Tech looked surprised by his own voice. In. Simmons and Vasquez exchanged a glance, then shrugged in unison. In. Mitchell looked at his team, These men who had just voted to walk into danger because an old woman shamed them with her courage. He shook his head, but he was smiling. Against my better judgment, we are in. But we do this smart, overwatch first, full reconnaissance. Nothing moves until Shepard clears it. They move forward with the sun climbing toward noon and shadows shrinking to nothing. The drone site came into view from a ridgeline half a click out. Through her scope, Claire could see the wreckage clearly. The RQ-170 Sentinel lay broken in a natural bowl, its flying wing design crumpled against stone, the white composite skin scorched black in places. And it was too intact. A drone falling from 30,000 feet should have been shattered into fragments, scattered across a debris field hundreds of meters wide. This one was damaged but largely whole, which meant it had not fallen. It had been brought down in a controlled descent, possibly by jamming or hacking, which meant the enemy had sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. Or it meant the crash was staged. Claire studied the area around the wreck through her scope. The bowl was approximately 200 meters across, ringed by elevated positions that offered perfect fields of fire. The only approach was from the north, down a gentle slope that was completely exposed for the last 100 meters. A kill box, textbook perfect. She scanned the heights, looking for any sign of enemy presence. Hide positions, observers, the glint of optics. She found nothing, which told her exactly nothing. A professional enemy did not reveal themselves until the moment of ambush. Mitchell sat up beside her with his own optics. What do you see? I see a trap so obvious it makes me wonder if the real trap is something else entirely, Claire said. That drone did not crash. It was brought down. The wreckage was positioned. This whole site is theater. What is the play? Steele asked from his positions securing their backside. Make us commit to the recovery, then hit us when we are exposed, Claire said. Standard ambush doctrine. But there is something off. If Volkov is running this, he knows I'm here by now. He knows how I think. So this obvious trap might be misdirection for something more subtle. You keep talking about this Volkov like he is some kind of ghost, Tex said. How do you even know he is still alive? How do you know he is here? Because I know him, Claire said simply. And because these traps carry his signature, the way a painting carries a brushstroke. No one else thinks this way. No one else teaches this way. She pointed to the drone. Look at the positioning. It is visible from exactly one approach vector. Inviting. The ground around it has been disturbed but not cratered, which means no secondary explosions. Which means the explosives are buried but not yet detonated. So we are looking at a command-detonated ambush, Mitchell said. Someone with eyes on the site waiting for us to get close. Yes, Claire confirmed, which means there is an observer, probably on one of those high positions. If we can find the observer, we can neutralize the ambush. And if we cannot find them, then we trigger the trap and hope we are fast enough to survive it. Mitchell made his decision. Shepard and Steele, you have overwatch here. Priest and Brennan, you are the recovery element, but you do not move until Shepard gives the clear. Tech with me at command position. Simmons and Vasquez, security on our flanks. It was a solid plan. It would probably get half of them killed. They established positions with the patient care of professionals who understood that haste was the enemy of survival. Claire found a hide among the rocks with good sight lines to the drone and the surrounding heights. She set up her M110, checking the scope, the wind, the angle. 700 meters to the drone, longer to some of the high positions. Steele positioned himself 15 meters to her left with his saw, covering a different arc of fire. Between them, they had overlapping fields that covered most of the bowl. Most was not all. Claire settled into the shooting position that her body remembered from countless hours on ranges and battlefields. Left hand supporting the forestock, right hand on the grip, cheek weld solid against the stock. Eye aligned with the scope, breathing controlled, heartbeat steady. This was the moment she lived for, the moment when everything else fell away and there was only the rifle, the target, the wind, and the simple mathematics of trajectory and time. She scanned the heights systematically, grid by grid, looking for anything that did not belong. A reflection, a shadow that moved wrong, the straight line of a rifle barrel against organic curves of stone. 20 minutes passed. 30. The sun climbed higher. Heat shimmer began to distort the air, making precise ranging difficult. Then she saw it. Not a reflection or movement, an absence. On the eastern height, there was a shadow that was too perfect, too dark, as if something was blocking light rather than simply not receiving it. She adjusted her scope, dialing up magnification. The shadow resolved into a small cave or crevice, perhaps 3 feet wide, invisible from any angle except this one. And in that darkness, the faintest suggestion of a shape, man-sized, watching. Possible contact, she whispered into the comms. Eastern height, bearing 090, range 800 meters. Looks like an observation post. Can you confirm? Mitchell asked. Negative. Too much shadow. But my gut says someone is there. Trust your gut, Mitchell said. Can you engage? At 800 meters with heat shimmer and uncertainty about whether it is even a person? No, I could waste ammunition on a rock. We need to draw them out or get closer confirmation. She continued scanning while considering options. Drawing out an observer required making them react, making them think their prey was committed, which meant sending someone into the kill zone. She was about to suggest a plan when movement caught her eye, not from the observation post, from the drone itself. Someone was already there. Her heart rate spiked as she trained her scope on the wreckage. A figure emerged from behind the drone's broken fuselage. Then another. Both wore local dress, loose pants, and long shirts, but they moved with military precision. One carried an AK pattern rifle, the other had a radio. Contact in the bowl, she reported. 2 military-age males armed, currently at the drone site. They are already there? Mitchell's voice was tight. How? They were waiting inside the wreckage, Claire said, tracking them through her scope. This was never about us reaching the drone. It was about us revealing our positions when we tried. The 2 men near the drone were not attempting to hide. They moved casually, deliberately, knowing they were bait. The one with the radio raised it and spoke. Claire could not hear the words, but she did not need to. She swung her scope back to the observation post on the eastern height. The shadow shifted. A face emerged into light for just a moment. Pale skin, gray beard, European features. And in that instant, across 800 meters and 38 years, Claire Donnelly looked into the eyes of Colonel Dmitry Volkov. He smiled. Then hell opened up. The drone exploded first, a massive detonation that sent a fireball rolling skyward and shrapnel screaming in all directions. The 2 men who had been standing beside it disappeared in the blast, sacrifices to theater, to the demonstration that Volkov was willing to kill his own to make a point. Before the sound of the first explosion finished echoing, secondary charges began detonating around the bowl. Not random, coordinated, creating a pattern of fire that would funnel anyone trying to escape towards specific kill zones. And then the shooting started. From the eastern height where Volkov had revealed himself. From the northern slope behind what had been their planned approach. From positions in the bowl itself where fighters had been buried under camouflage, waiting for days perhaps, patient as stone. Rounds snapped past Claire's position, impacting rock, sending chips flying. She flinched down, pressing herself into the minimal cover her hide provided. Contact! 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 Multiple positions, Mitchell was shouting into the comms. Suppress and displace, bound back by teams. Claire brought her rifle up, found a target on the northern slope. A fighter rising to fire an RPG. She let him slightly, compensated for wind and distance, squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The fighter jerked and fell, the RPG launching skyward at a wild angle before detonating harmlessly against a cliff face. She cycled the bolt, acquired another target, fired, cycled, acquired, fired, falling into the rhythm that lived in her muscle memory, the terrible meditation of ending lives at distance. Steele's awe opened up beside her, the heavy weapon roaring on full automatic, pouring suppressive fire into the eastern height where Volkov had been. Tracer rounds arced across the sky, beautiful and deadly, marking the path to death. The team was moving, bounding back by pairs, covering each other, maintaining discipline even as the world came apart in fire and noise. This was what training bought you. The ability to think when thinking should be impossible. But they were outnumbered, outpositioned, caught in the exact trap Claire had warned about. She saw Vasquez go down, hit in the leg, Simmons dragging him to cover while firing one-handed. Saw Priest running low with his medical bag, fearless in his compassion. Saw Mitchell directing fire, keeping his team together through voice and example. And she saw, through her scope, Volkov emerging from his observation post, rifle in hand, moving with the confidence of a man who had orchestrated this perfectly. He was 800 meters away. The heat shimmer was severe. The wind was gusting. The target was moving. Every factor argued against the shot. Claire steadied her breathing, let her heartbeat slow, found the space between seconds where the impossible became possible. She placed the crosshair center mass on Volkov's chest, led him slightly for movement, compensated for wind, for drop, for the rotation of the earth itself at this range. And she thought of 7 names: Carlos, Miguel, Jose, Antonio, Fernando, Raul, Diego. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle fired. The bullet flew 800 meters across sky and time and memory. And Volkov stumbled, struck, went down. But even as he fell, Claire saw him reaching for his radio, saw his mouth moving, giving orders, completing the plan even as his blood soaked into Afghan stone. Because the real trap was not the ambush. The real trap was what came next. The world became sound and fury. Bullets carved the air into geometric patterns of death, each round a line drawn from weapon to target, from intention to consequence. Claire pressed herself against stone that offered cover measured in inches, her cheeks scraping rock as rounds snapped overhead, close enough to feel the pressure wave. Steele's all had gone silent. She risked a glance to her left and saw him struggling with a jam, his big hands working the weapon's action with controlled urgency, while rounds kicked up dust around his position. Without his suppressive fire, the enemy on the eastern height was advancing, using the terrain for cover, moving with the discipline of professional soldiers. She swung her rifle toward them, found a target in her scope, a fighter breaking from one rock to another. She led him, squeezed. The rifle bucked. The man went down. She cycled the bolt, acquired another target, fired, cycled. The rhythm was automatic now, divorced from thought, pure muscle memory honed across decades. But even as she fired, even as she dropped targets with the mechanical efficiency that came from being very good at a terrible thing, she knew the math was wrong. 6 Americans against what looked like 20 or more enemy fighters who held the high ground, who had prepared this killing field with the patience of spiders building webs. Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos on the comms. Fall back by teams, bound to rally point echo, acknowledge. The responses came in sequence. Priest moving with Vasquez, Tech displacing, Simmons covering. Each man executing the drill they had practiced until it became instinct, the choreography of withdrawal under fire. Claire waited for Steele to get his weapon running before she moved. That was the contract of Overwatch. You did not leave your partner exposed. He cleared the jam, slapped the feed tray closed, nodded to her. She rose from her hide and sprinted 15 meters to the next covered position, her lungs screaming, her legs burning, her body reminding her that 62 was not 22. She dove behind a boulder as rounds tracked her movement, impacting stone where she had been a second before. The sprint had cost her. She coughed, tasting copper, feeling wetness in her chest that was not sweat. Steele's Law opened it up again, the heavy weapon roaring defiance, buying her the second she needed to resettle and return fire. They leapfrogged backward, trading positions, maintaining the rhythm of tactical withdrawal that kept them alive minute by minute. Rally Point Echo was a cluster of large rocks 200 meters back from their original position. Mitchell had chosen it during planning as a defendable position with multiple egress routes. Now it became fortress and refuge as the team collapsed back into a tight perimeter. Claire was the last one in, stumbling more than running, her rifle hanging from its sling, her hands on her knees as she tried to pull oxygen from air that seemed too thin to sustain life. Blood flecked her lips. The tumor in her chest felt like a fist clenching tighter with each breath. Priest was already working on Vasquez, the younger man's leg wound bleeding through the hasty bandage Simmons had applied. The medic's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away fabric, exposing the wound, packing it with gauze. Through and through, Priest said, his voice carrying the particular calm of medical professionals in crisis. Miss the bone. You will live if we can stop the bleeding. Vasquez's face was pale, but he managed a weak smile. Does this mean I get to go home early? Only if you promise to name your first kid after me, Priest replied, applying pressure that made Vasquez gasp. Mitchell was on his radio trying to raise headquarters, trying to call for support. His voice was tense but controlled. Chapman, this is Vanguard Actual. We are in contact, heavy contact. Grid coordinates to follow, requesting immediate air support in QRF. Static answered him. He adjusted frequencies, tried again. Nothing but the hiss of electromagnetic emptiness. They are jamming us, Tech said, looking at his equipment. Sophisticated stuff. Military grade. This is not Taliban. Claire had settled against a rock, her rifle across her lap, her breathing slowly returning to something approaching normal. She knew what was coming before Mitchell said it. The lieutenant commander turned to her. Volkov, this is him. Yes, she confirmed. He has been planning this for a longer time, long before we arrived. Maybe long before the drone went down. This entire sector is his classroom, and we are the lesson. What lesson? Steele asked, feeding a new belt into his saw. That American technology and American confidence are not substitutes for terrain knowledge and patience, Claire said. That you can have all the satellites and drones and night vision in the world and still walk into an ambush that a 40-year-old doctrine predicted you would walk into. She coughed again, wiping blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. And that old men who remember the first Afghan war can still teach new men how to die in these mountains. Did you kill him? Mitchell asked. I saw you take the shot. I hit him, Claire said. Center mass at 800 meters. But he was wearing armor, or I did not compensate enough for wind. Or God decided he deserves to live longer than me. He went down, but I saw him move after. Saw him talking on his radio. Calling in what? Simmons asked from his position, watching their back trail. As if in answer, the first mortar round impacted 50 meters from their position. The explosion was a hammer blow of overpressure and shrapnel. Rock chips and dust showered down on them. Incoming! Mitchell shouted unnecessarily. Everyone was already making themselves as small as possible, pressing into whatever cover the rocks provided. The mortars came in a pattern, walking toward their position, each round closer than the last. 60 millimeter, Claire judged from the sound. Soviet era, probably the same tubes the Mujahideen used against Soviet forces in the 80s. Old weapons, but effective. Gravity and high explosives did not care about age. The fourth round hit close enough that the blast wave slapped her against stone, rattling her teeth, filling her ears with ringing that drowned out all other sound. She tasted blood and dust and the particular metallic flavor of fear. When her hearing returned, she heard Mitchell shouting orders. We cannot stay here. They will drop one right on top of us eventually. We move in 30 seconds. Suppress on my mark, then bound east to that ridgeline. That ridgeline was 300 meters away across open ground. It might as well have been 300 miles. But there was no choice. Stay and die to mortars. Move and die to small arms fire. Either way, the math was unforgiving, but at least movement offered the illusion of agency. Claire checked her rifle, checked her ammunition. 4 magazines left, 80 rounds. She had fired more than she realized. The expenditure of bullets was the expenditure of options, and she was running low on both. On my mark, Mitchell said, his hand raised. 3, 2, 1, mark. The team rose as one and opened fire, pouring rounds toward the enemy positions in a wall of suppressive fire designed not to kill, but to keep heads down. Under that cover, Mitchell and Tech sprinted for the ridgeline, moving with the desperate speed of men who knew death was measured in seconds. They made it, took cover, began returning fire. Next pair. Priest grabbed at Vasquez, hauling the wounded man up, half carrying him across the open ground, while Brennan ran alongside, providing what cover he could. Mortar rounds continued to fall, the enemy adjusting fire, trying to bracket the fleeing Americans. Claire watched through her scope, scanning for targets, providing precision fire where the others provided volume. She saw a mortar team on a distant slope, 2 men working the tube. She put rounds near them, close enough to make them flinch, far enough that she did not waste ammunition on a low-probability shot. Simmons went next, then Steele, the big man moving with surprising speed, his saw held at the ready, which left Claire alone in the original position, the rear guard, the last to leave. She had been here before. El Salvador. Different rocks, different enemy, same mathematics of sacrifice. Your turn, Shepard, Mitchell called over the radio. Move now. She rose, turned to run, and felt her left leg collapse beneath her. There was no pain at first, just the sudden absence of support, the ground rushing up to meet her. She hit hard, her rifle clattering against stone. The pain came a second later, sharp, specific, a hot line across her calf that turned the world white at the edges. She looked down and saw blood spreading across her pant leg. Not arterial, not immediately fatal, but enough to rob her leg of strength. "Shepard is hit," she heard Steele shout. "I am going back for her." "Negative," she gasped into her radio. "Stay in position. I am mobile." She pushed herself up, testing the leg. It held weight, barely. She could hobble, could move, slowly. She began the 300-meter crossing alone, moving in a broken stumble that was part run and part controlled fall. Rounds snapped past her. She did not return fire, could not, needed both hands to maintain balance, to keep moving forward. 50 meters. The ridgeline seemed to recede rather than approach. Her vision was narrowing, darkening at the edges. Blood loss or tumor, or simply the body's decision that it had endured enough. 100 meters. She went down again, caught herself on her hands, pushed up. The rifle sling was cutting into her shoulder. Her leg was a distant thing, numb now, which was either very good or very bad. 200 meters. She could see faces on the ridgeline. Mitchell, Steele, Priest reaching toward her, so close, too far. The mortar round that should have killed her landed 10 meters to her right. The blast wave picked her up and threw her forward, tumbling her across stone, separating her from her rifle, from her gear, from everything except the fundamental imperative to survive. She landed in a heap at the base of the ridgeline. Hands grabbed her, pulled her up and over into cover. Priest's face swam into view, his lips moving, words she could not hear through the ringing in her ears. She lay on her back, looking up at sky that was too blue, too clean, too indifferent to the small human dramas played out beneath it. Her whole body was pain now, specific injuries lost in a general symphony of damage. Priest was working on her leg, cutting away fabric, exposing the wound. She felt pressure, felt the sting of antiseptic, felt bandages being wrapped tight. The medic's cross swung above her on its chain, catching light, and she thought absurdly of all the men this man had saved and how she was just one more body to patch and send back into the machine. "Can you hear me?" Priest was saying, his hand on her face, turning her head to look at him. "Claire, can you hear me?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "You took shrapnel in the leg and the back. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but you have lost blood. You need to stay still." "No time to stay still," she managed. "They are coming." Mitchell appeared above her. "Shepard, we are going to hold here until we can get comms up and call for extract. Can you fight?" She tried to sit up. The world tilted dangerously but steadied. "Give me my rifle." Steele handed it to her. The weapon was scratched, the scope possibly damaged from the blast, but it was whole. She checked the action. Still functional, loaded a fresh magazine with hands that shook but did not fail. "I can fight," she said. The defensive position they held was good but not perfect. The ridgeline offered cover from direct fire but was exposed to mortars. They had limited ammunition, one man seriously wounded, one woman who should be in a hospital bed instead of on a battlefield. And the enemy was regrouping for another push. Tech had his radio disassembled, working on it with the focused intensity of a man who knew their survival depended on reestablishing communications. "The jamming is localized," he said. "If I can boost the signal, punch through the interference, we might get a message out." "How long?" Mitchell asked. 10 minutes, maybe 20, assuming they do not rush us in the meantime. "They will rush us," Claire said. She had propped herself against a rock, rifle resting on a natural ledge that gave her a stable shooting platform. "Volkov knows we are isolated, knows we are wounded. He will come now before we can dig in or get reinforcements. Then we hold," Mitchell said simply. "We have held worse." "Have you?" Claire asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. "Have you held against professional soldiers who have been fighting in these mountains longer than you have been alive? Who know every rock and draw? Who are willing to dianda to prove a point?" Mitchell met her eyes. "No. But we learn fast. Let us hope fast is fast enough." The attack came 20 minutes later, and it came from a direction they had not fully covered. The enemy had circled during the mortar barrage, using the noise and distraction to reposition. Now they came from the north, 15 fighters moving in coordinated bounds, using fire and movement doctrine that spoke of professional training. "Contact north!" Simmons shouted, opening fire. The ridgeline erupted in gunfire as the team engaged. Claire found her rhythm again. Scope to eye, breathe, squeeze, cycle, acquire. Each shot was a small victory against the chaos. Each target that went down was one less rifle aimed at her team. But they kept coming. For every one that fell, another took their place. The enemy was willing to pay the blood price, and they had more blood to spend. Steele's awe was the anchor of their defense, the heavy weapon pouring fire into the enemy advance, forcing them to ground, breaking their momentum. But the big gun was also a target. The enemy concentrated fire on Steele's position, rounds hammering the rocks around him, trying to suppress or kill the greatest threat. Claire saw a fighter with an RPG rising from cover, the rocket-propelled grenade aimed directly at Steele's position. She swung her rifle, found him in her scope, fired. The shot was rushed, not centered, but it hit. The fighter jerked, the RPG launching wild, detonating against a cliff face 50 meters from any target. Steele did not acknowledge the save. There was no time. He kept firing, kept the enemy pinned, kept his brothers alive through volume and violence. The radio crackled. Tech's voice tight with urgency. "I have got signal. Broken but there, sending emergency traffic now." Claire heard him in the background of the gunfight, shouting into the handset. Any station. This is Vanguard. We are in heavy contact grid. Follows we have wounded. We need immediate extract and close air support." The response was faint, broken by static, but it was there. "Vanguard, this is Chapman. We read you broken and faint. Say again your grid." Tech repeated the coordinates, then added, "We are in a bad way here. Multiple wounded. Enemy force estimated 20 plus. Request priority handling." "Copy, Vanguard," Chapman replied. "QRF is spinning up. Fast movers are 30 mics out. Can you hold for 30? 30 minutes. An eternity in combat. 1,000 things could happen in 30 minutes, most of them fatal." Mitchell made the call without hesitation. "Affirmative. Chapman, we will hold. Tell them to hurry." The attack intensified as if the enemy had heard the radio traffic and knew time was now against them. Mortars began falling again, closer now, danger close. The crews willing to risk hitting their own fighters to break the American position. Brennan took a round through the shoulder, the impact spinning him around, dropping him. Priest was there instantly, working while under fire, his hands steady despite the hell around him. Through and through again, Priest shouted, "You are collecting holes like stamps. Hold pressure here." Simmons was hit next, not a through and through, but a graze across his ribs that left a furrow of torn flesh and broken ribs. He kept firing, one hand pressed against his side, the other on his rifle trigger. The defensive perimeter was shrinking, not in space but in capability. Wounded men could fight, but not at full strength. Ammunition was running low. The careful discipline of aimed fire was giving way to suppressive volume because fear and pain made precision difficult. Claire's world had narrowed to the circle of her scope. Find target, fire, cycle, find target, fire, cycle. The mechanical repetition was all that kept the darkness at bay. She had stopped counting rounds, stopped counting bodies, just kept shooting until the rifle was empty and then reloaded and kept shooting. Her last magazine, 20 rounds between existence and irrelevance. She looked at the others. Mitchell was bleeding from a head wound, blood sheeting down one side of his face. But he was still directing fire, still holding the team together. Steele's saw had gone silent again, the big man working frantically to clear another jam. Priest was everywhere, moving from wounded to wounded, performing triage under fire, keeping men alive through skill and faith. These boys, she thought, these brave, stupid boys who voted to follow an old woman into hell because she shamed them with her courage, and now she could not save them. The thought came with surprising clarity. The math was finally, absolutely, undeniably wrong. They could not hold for 30 minutes. They would be overrun in 10. Unless Claire pulled out her radio and switched to a frequency she had not used in 38 years. A frequency that Soviet advisors had monitored during the Cold War. A frequency that an old Russian might still listen to out of habit or nostalgia or the simple inability to stop being a soldier. She keyed the mic and spoke in Russian, the language rusty but functional. "Volkov, I know you can hear me. This is Shepard." Static answered, then a voice, accented, familiar despite the decades. "Shepard, I hoped you would call. Are you ready to surrender?" "No," Claire said. "I am ready to talk. You wanted this duel. You arranged this entire operation to face me. Here I am. Let my men go and you can have me." The silence that followed was filled with gunfire and explosions. But she waited, knowing he was considering, calculating, deciding. "Why would I trade 6 for 1? Volkov asked. "I can kill you all." "Because killing us all is easy and meaningless," Claire replied. "But facing me, finishing what we started in El Salvador, that has honor. You are Spetsnaz. I was sad. We are the same, you and I. Old wolves who should have died in our wars but did not. Let us end it properly. Another pause, then, what do you propose? Ceasefire. You pull your fighters back 200 meters. I come to you alone. My men get their extract. You and I finish this. And if I refuse? Then you win by arithmetic but lose by honor, Claire said. And you spend the rest of your life knowing you killed an old woman and 5 boys through patience instead of courage. The radio crackled. She could almost hear him breathing, thinking, remembering. 1 hour, Volkov said finally. I pull back. Your men extract. You meet me at the drone site, alone, unarmed. Armed, Claire countered. Rifles, close range, like it should have been in 1987. Another pause, then a sound that might have been a laugh. Agreed, Volkov said. 1 hour. If you do not come, I resume the attack and kill them all slowly. I will come, Claire promised. I know you will, Volkov replied. The shepherd always comes for her flock, even when it costs her everything. The gunfire stopped. Not immediately, but in stages as Volkov's fighters received the order and withdrew, moving back into the rocks, disappearing like smoke. The silence that followed was louder than the battle had been. Mitchell stared at Claire. What the hell did you just do? I bought you 30 minutes to get out of here, she said. When the helicopters come, you get on them and you go. And you? I finished something I should have finished 38 years ago. Priest was beside her now, his medic's eyes reading her vitals, seeing what she was hiding. Ma'am, you cannot go anywhere. You have lost too much blood. That leg needs surgery. The tumor in your chest is bleeding. You are dying. I have been dying since the day my father whispered 7 names and made me promise to bring them all home, Claire said. This is just the specifics becoming clear. She looked at each of them in turn. Mitchell with his bleeding head, Steele with his jammed weapon, Priest with his cross and his kind eyes, the wounded and the whole. Her flock. I am 62 years old with terminal cancer, she said. I have months left at best. You boys have children, decades. The math is clear. I trade my months for your years. This is not sacrifice. This is accounting. We do not leave our people, Mitchell said, the SEAL ethos carved into his voice. I am not your people, Claire replied. I am Army. I am old. I am already dead, just too stubborn to stop walking. You leaving me is not abandonment. It is letting me do the one thing I can still do right. Steele spoke up, his voice rough. And what is that? Keep my promise, she said simply. Bring them all home, all of you, even if I cannot come with you. The sound of rotors in the distance, growing louder. The helicopter's coming. You have 5 minutes to decide, Claire said. Get on those birds or stay here and die with me. Either way, I am going to that drone site. I am facing Volkov. I am ending this. Mitchell looked at her, and she saw the moment he understood, saw the calculation in his eyes, the tactical correctness of her sacrifice, the mathematical beauty of 1 for 6. He hated it, but he accepted it. All right, he said quietly. We go. But Shepard, if you survive this, you better find a way home, because I will have a lot of paperwork to explain. If I survive this, she said, I will be too busy dying of cancer to care about your paperwork. The helicopters were close now, 2 Blackhawks coming in fast and low. The team began moving toward the landing zone, helping the wounded, gathering gear. Claire remained behind. She checked her rifle, 1 magazine, 20 rounds. It would have to be enough. Steele was the last to leave. He stood in front of her, this big man who had learned to trust her judgment. You are the toughest person I have ever met, he said. I am the most stubborn, she corrected. There is a difference. He nodded, then did something unexpected. He came to attention and saluted. Sharp. Perfect. The tribute of one warrior to another. She returned it, her hand rising to her brow despite protocol saying she did not have to. Bring them home, Shepard, Steele said. I already did, she replied. Now go, before I change my mind and make you stay. He left, jogging toward the helicopters that were landing in a storm of dust and noise. She watched them load, watched the birds lift, watched them disappear into the distance, growing smaller, becoming memory. And then she was alone. Alone with her rifle and her pain and the promise she had made to a dying man 41 years ago. She stood, testing her wounded leg. It held, barely. She began walking toward the drone site, toward Volkov, toward the end of a story that had been written in blood across 4 decades and 3 continents. The sun was setting. The mountains were turning gold and purple. It was beautiful. Everything was beautiful when you were walking toward your death. She thought of her father, of 7 names, of 22 men saved and 6 more just extracted. The math was not perfect, but it was better than nothing. And better than nothing was all anyone could ask for. The walk to the drone site took 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. Each step was negotiation between will and flesh, between the promise she had made and the body that was breaking its own promises to carry her forward. The leg wound had stopped bleeding, but the shrapnel in her back ground against bone with every movement, sending lightning up her spine. Claire used her rifle as a crutch, the weapon that had been her companion for 4 decades now reduced to a walking stick for a woman who was running out of ways to stand. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the mountains in shades of amber and blood. Long shadows stretched across the valley like fingers reaching for something they could never grasp. The drone site lay ahead, the wreckage stark against the stone. The 2 men who had been sacrificed there were gone, their bodies removed by Volkov's fighters, leaving only dark stains on rock to mark where they had stood. The burned smell of the explosion still hung in the air, mixing with the cordite and copper scent of the battle just ended. And there, standing beside the shattered wing of the RQ-170, was Colonel Dmitry Volkov. He was tall, lean in the way that endurance athletes were lean, all sinew and efficiency. His hair was gray, cut military short. His beard was gray as well, neatly trimmed despite weeks or months in these mountains. He wore local clothes, the loose pants and long shirt of a Pashtun elder, but he carried them with a bearing that was purely Russian military. And he was bleeding. The shot Claire had taken at 800 meters had hit him. She could see that now. His left shoulder was bandaged, the fabric stained dark. But he stood straight, rifle held casually in his right hand, waiting with the infinite patience of a man who had learned that in these mountains, time was the only ally that never betrayed. Claire stopped 50 meters from him, the distance that separated marksmen from knife fighters, the space where rifles decided outcomes. They looked at each other across that gap, 2 old warriors at the end of a war that had outlasted empires. Volkov spoke first, his English accented but clear. "You came. I was not certain you would." "I gave my word," Claire replied. "And unlike some people, I keep my promises." "Ah, yes," he said, a thin smile touching his lips. "The 7 you left in El Salvador. Carlos and his brothers. You think I do not know that weight? I carried my own names from Afghanistan in the 80s. Yuri, Alexei, Victor, Sergei, Konstantin, Dmitri, Pavel, 19, 20, 23, 21, 24, 18, 22, boys who believed Soviet propaganda and died learning truth in these same mountains." He shifted slightly, favoring his good shoulder. "We are the same, you and I, survivors carrying the dead. The difference is I made peace with it. You are still trying to balance scales that cannot balance." "I balanced them today," Claire said. 6 men extracted, 6 lives saved. That is enough. "Is it?" Volkov asked. "Can 6 men from this war erase 7 from another? Can any number of saved lives return the ones lost? We tell ourselves these mathematics work because the alternative is madness." He raised his rifle, not aiming but acknowledging. "I studied you for 4 years in El Salvador. I learned how you think, how you move. Your tactics became my textbook. I taught insurgents from Nicaragua to Syria using the shepherd as example. The woman who valued mission over men, who made hard choices and lived with them. You murdered 7 men to prove a point," Claire said, her voice hard. "That was not war. That was execution." "It was teaching," Volkov corrected. "I showed you that perfect tactics still fail against an enemy who is willing to sacrifice anything. That your American confidence in technology and training means nothing against patience and preparation. And I left you alive to carry that lesson, to let it eat you for decades." She felt anger then, hot and clean, burning away the pain and fatigue. "You made me live with their ghosts because you could not live with your own." "Perhaps," Volkov admitted. "Or perhaps I needed a worthy opponent to remember me when I am gone. We are the last of our kind, Shepard. The Cold War generation. The ones who fought in shadows so our countries could posture in light. When we die, no one will know what we did. No one will care." He lowered his rifle slightly. "So I kept you alive. Kept myself alive by keeping you haunted. We became each other's ghosts, bound by blood and memory." Claire raised her own rifle, sighting down the barrel at the man who had defined half her life. "And now, how does this end?" As it should have ended in 1987, Volkov said. Face to face, rifle to rifle. The way warriors meet when the war is done and only the warriors remain. One of us dies today, Claire stated. One of us was always going to die today, Volkov replied. The question is whether we die as enemies or as something else, something harder to name. He brought his rifle up to ready position, the barrel pointed at the ground between them, but ready to rise in the instant violence required. I am 68 years old, he continued. Cancer in my lungs from breathing Soviet diesel fumes and Afghan dust. 6 months, the doctors in Moscow told me. Maybe less. I came back to these mountains because this is where I should die, where I became who I am. Claire felt her grip tighten on her own rifle. I am 62, 18 months for the tumor in my chest, maybe less after what today cost me. I came here for the same reason, to die doing the only thing I know how to do. They stood in silence, two dying people who had spent their lives dealing death, now facing the final accounting. In another life, Volkov said quietly, we could have been friends. We think alike, value the same things. Honor, duty, the willingness to carry terrible weights so others do not have to. In another life, Claire agreed, we would not have needed to be soldiers at all. But this is the life we have, Volkov said, and it ends here. He raised his rifle to firing position. Claire matched the movement. 50 meters separated them. At this range, with these weapons, with their skills, the first shot would be the only shot that mattered. 3 seconds, Volkov said. We fire on 3. No tricks, no tactics, just who is faster, who is better, who deserves to live a few months longer. Claire settled the stock against her shoulder, found the sight picture, centered the front sight post on Volkov's chest. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped, the pain receded, everything receded except this moment, this target, this final test. 1, Volkov counted. She thought of her father, of the promise made at a grave in Arlington, of 7 names that had haunted her for 38 years, of 22 men saved and 6 more today, of a ledger that would never balance but that she had tried her best to even. 2, she thought of Carlos, young Carlos with his wife and 3 children, 22-year-old Brennan who would go home to his family. The math that said some lives were worth more than others because they had more life left to live. The terrible calculus that made her finger begin to tighten on the trigger. 3, but she did not fire. Volkov did not fire. They stood facing each other, rifles aimed, fingers on triggers, neither one able to complete the action. Why? Volkov asked, his voice strained. Why do you hesitate? Because I finally understand, Claire said. Killing you will not bring back Carlos, will not erase the 7, will not balance anything. It will just be one more death in a lifetime of deaths. One more name I carry until cancer takes me. She lowered her rifle slowly. And I am tired, Dmitri. I am so goddamn tired of carrying names. Volkov stared at her, his rifle still aimed but wavering. You would spare me? After everything? I would stop this, Claire said. I would end the cycle. You killed 7 to teach me a lesson. I could kill you to teach no one anything. Or I could walk away and let us both die on our own terms, in our own time. That is not how wars end, Volkov protested. This war ended when the Soviet Union fell, Claire replied. We are just 2 old soldiers who forgot to stop fighting. Let us stop now. Let us lay down our rifles and admit that the enemy was never each other. It was time, and time has already won. Volkov's rifle slowly lowered. His face showed confusion, then something that might have been relief. You are serious. You would let me live. For 6 months, Claire said, maybe less. Same as me. We are both sentenced. Why should I be your executioner when cancer will do the job? She took a step forward, her wounded leg nearly buckling. And maybe, just maybe, if we stop adding to the count of dead, we can both die having done one decent thing at the end. Volkov lowered his rifle completely, letting it hang from its sling. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. In El Salvador, you spared me once before. In the jungle, you had me in your sights and you let me run. Why? Because I saw your face, Claire said. And you were not a monster. You were just another soldier doing terrible things because someone with a flag and a doctrine told you it was necessary. Killing you would have changed nothing except making me the executioner instead of the warrior. She was close now, within arm's reach. And 38 years later, I still believe that. We are not enemies. We are casualties of the same stupid game that old men play with young lives. Volkov reached up with his good hand and unslung his rifle, letting it fall to the ground. The sound of metal on stone was loud in the silence. Then Claire did the same. Her M110, the weapon that had been her identity for so long, landed beside his AK-74 with a clatter that sounded like chains breaking. "What now?" Volkov asked. "Now we sit," Claire said, lowering herself carefully to the ground, her back against a rock. "We are both too tired to keep standing anyway." Volkov sat as well, grimacing as the movement pulled at his shoulder wound. "We sit and do what?" "We wait," she said. "My people will come looking for me eventually. Your people will come looking for you. Whoever finds us first gets to write the ending. And if they find us together, then maybe someone learns that enemies can stop being enemies when they finally talk instead of shoot." They sat in silence as the sun touched the horizon and the sky began its transition from day to night. The mountains turned purple, then blue, then black. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched humans kill each other for millennia, indifferent and eternal. "Tell me about your 7, Volkov said finally. "Their names, their stories, let them be remembered by someone other than just you." And Claire did. She spoke of Carlos, the farmer who became a sergeant, of Miguel, who wanted to be a teacher, of Jose, who had a crooked smile and could repair any engine, of Antonio, who wrote poetry in spare moments and dreamed of publishing a book, of Fernando, barely 19, who joined because his family needed the money, of Raul, the quiet one who could track a man through jungle that left no trace, of Diego, who played guitar and sang songs that made hardened soldiers weep. She spoke all 7 names and the lives they had lived and the futures they had been denied. When she finished, Volkov was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke of his own dead, the Soviet soldiers who had fallen in Afghanistan in the 80s. Boys who had been told they were liberating a grateful people and learned instead that liberation looked a lot like occupation. "Yuri Petrov," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades. 19 years old from a village outside Leningrad. He wanted to be a doctor, loved to read Tolstoy, died when his armored personnel carrier hit a mine in the Panjshir Valley. Alexei Sokolov, 20 years old, a farmer's son like your Carlos. He could fix any piece of equipment with wire and intuition, killed by sniper fire while repairing a radio antenna. Viktor Morozov, 23, the oldest of the 7, a political officer's son who believed in communism until he saw what we were doing to villages, died trying to save 2 wounded men from a burning truck. Sergei Kuznetsov, 21, a poet who wrote letters home about the beauty of these mountains even as they killed us, caught in crossfire during a supply convoy ambush. Konstantin Ivanov, 24, married 3 weeks before deployment. His wife sent him a letter saying she was pregnant. He never met his son, died from infected wounds because we had no antibiotics left. Dmitry Volkov, yes, my nephew, named after me, 18 years old. His mother, my sister, begged me to keep him safe. I tried. He died in my arms from a chest wound, calling for his mother. And Pavel Romanov, 22, a musician who played balalaika around campfires, made us remember we were human, killed by a mine 3 days before his rotation home. Volkov's voice broken on the last name. He was silent for a long moment. "They are all the same age now," he said finally. "The dead do not age. Carlos is forever 34. My Yuri is forever 19. They stay young while we grow old carrying them." "That is the price," Claire agreed. "We get to live. They do not. So we carry them until we join them." "Do you believe in an afterlife?" Volkov asked. "I believe in something," Claire said. "I have to. Otherwise, what was any of it for?" The temperature dropped as night settled fully, the kind of cold that came from altitude and clear skies. Claire felt it seeping into her bones, into her wounds, into the tumor that was slowly killing her. Volkov noticed her shivering. He pulled a blanket from his pack and offered it to her. She took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. "In another life," she said, "this would be a very strange camping trip." Volkov laughed, a sound that was rusty from disuse. "In another life, we would not need blankets because we would not be in Afghanistan at all." "Where would you be?" Claire asked. "Teaching, perhaps," Volkov said. "Mathematics or history. Something useful." "You?" "A farm," Claire replied without hesitation. "Somewhere quiet, growing things instead of ending things." "That sounds nice," Volkov said. "It does," she agreed. "But we chose this life, and choices have consequences." They fell silent again. The pain in Claire's chest was constant now, a pressure that made each breath a conscious effort. She knew she was dying, not in 6 months or 18 in hours. The trauma of the day, the blood loss, the exertion, all of it was accelerating the tumor's work. Dimitri, she said, using his first name for the first time. Yes, Claire? I do not think I am going to last until morning. He turned to look at her in the darkness. I do not think I am either. The shoulder wound is infected. Sepsis is setting in. I can feel the fever. Then we die here, Claire said. Together. Two old wolves who finally stopped fighting. There are worse ways to go, Volkov agreed. But first, Claire said, reaching into her pocket, she pulled out the small wooden box that contained 7 spent shell casings. First I do this. She opened the box, taking out the casings one by one, lining them up on the rock beside her. 7 golden sentinels. 7 promises kept and broken. What are those? Volkov asked. My 7, Claire said. 1 casing for each man I lost. I have carried them for 38 years. Every deployment, every mission, a reminder of the cost. Volkov watched as she'd arranged them carefully. Then he reached into his own pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he poured his own collection. 7 rifle rounds, unfired, never to be fired. My 7, he said. I carry the bullets that would have been theirs. The rounds they never fired because they died before they could. They sat looking at 14 pieces of brass and lead, the physical manifestation of guilt and memory. We should bury them, Claire said. Here, together. Let them rest together even if we could not. Volkov nodded. He used his knife to scrape a small hollow in the earth between them. Claire placed her 7 casings in it. Volkov added his 7 rounds, 14 memories, 14 names, 14 young men who had trusted and died. They covered the hollow with stones, building a small cairn. Unmarked, unknown to anyone but them, a monument to all the soldiers whose names were carved only in the hearts of those who led them. There, Claire said when it was done, now they can rest. And maybe we can too, Volkov added. They settled back against the rocks. The cold was deeper now. The stars were bright. Claire's breathing was shallow, labored. Volkov's fever was making him shake. Claire, Volkov said, his voice weak. Yes, I am sorry, for Carlos and the others, for making you carry them alone for so long. I am sorry too, she replied, for whatever deaths I caused among your students, for perpetuating the cycle. We were soldiers, Volkov said. We did what soldiers do. But we can stop being soldiers now, Claire said. We can just be 2 people who are tired. The radio on Claire's belt crackled. She had forgotten about it. Mitchell's voice came through, staticky and distant. Shepard, this is Vanguard. We are inbound with QRF. ETA, your position 20 mics. Sit tight. We are coming for you. Claire reached for the radio with fingers that barely responded. Her voice when she spoke was barely a whisper. Negative, Vanguard. Stand down. Mission complete. All personnel accounted for. Return to base. Shepard. Mitchell's voice carried confusion and concern. Say again? Are you secure? I am secure, she said, and it was true in a way that had nothing to do with tactical situations. Tell them all I kept my promise, brought them home, all of them. Ma'am, we are not leaving you out there. Lieutenant Commander, she said, putting officer authority into her fading voice. That is an order. You have wounded who need medical attention. You have done your duty, I have done mine. Go home. There was a long pause, then Steele's voice, not Mitchell's. It has been an honor, Shepard. The honor was mine, she replied. The radio went silent. They will come anyway, Volkov said. Your people do not abandon their own. Then they will find 2 old soldiers who finally stop fighting, Claire said. And maybe they will understand. Or maybe they will make us heroes, Volkov said. Paint us as enemies to the bitter end. Write the story they need instead of the truth. As long as the boys go home, Claire said, I do not care what story they tell. Her vision was narrowing. The stars were getting brighter or she was getting darker, she could not tell which. The pain had faded to a distant thing, her body's systems shutting down in sequence, prioritizing what little remained. Dimitri, she said. Yes? Are you afraid? Of death? No. I have lived with death too long to fear it. I am only afraid that I wasted the years I had. You did not waste them, Claire said. You taught. You survived. You carried your dead with honor. That is not waste. Neither did you waste yours, Volkov replied. You saved 28 lives across your career. 22 in El Salvador, 6 today. That is more than most soldiers can claim. 28 is not enough to balance 7, she said. It never will be, he agreed. But it is still 28 people who live because you did your job. Their children will live, their grandchildren. You changed the world in small ways that matter. The darkness at the edges of her vision was spreading. She could feel her heart slowing, the beats getting further apart. This was it, the final accounting, the last breath. I see them, she whispered. Who? My father, and Carlos, and the others. They are waiting. Tell them I am sorry, Volkov said. Tell them yourself, Claire replied. You will be there soon enough. Her eyes closed. The darkness was complete now. But it was not frightening. It was peaceful, an ending that felt earned. The last thing she heard was Volkov's voice, speaking in Russian, a prayer or a poem, or simply words for the dying. And then there was silence. The sun rose the next morning on two bodies sitting against rocks in the mountains of Afghanistan. An old woman and an old man, enemies who had become something else in their final hours. The cairn of stones between them marked a grave that no one else would understand. Mitchell found them 6 hours later, leading the quick reaction force that had ignored Claire's order to stand down. He approached slowly, weapon ready, not knowing what to expect. What he found was peace. Claire Donnelly sat with her back against stone, her rifle beside her, her eyes closed. A blanket draped over her shoulders. Her face was relaxed in a way that Mitchell had never seen in life. The lines of pain and guilt smoothed away. Beside her sat a gray, bearded man in local dress, a Russian by the look of him, old, dead from a shoulder wound gone septic. His rifle lay beside Claire's, the two weapons crossed like swords at a funeral. Between them, a small cairn of stones. Mitchell knelt before it, carefully moving the rocks. Beneath he found 14 pieces of brass and lead. He did not know their significance, but he knew they mattered. He replaced the stones with reverence. Steele came up beside him. Sir, what do you want us to do? Mitchell looked at the two bodies, at the woman who had saved his team, at the enemy who had called a ceasefire to give her a warrior's end. We bring them both home, Mitchell said. She earned that much. And I think he did too. They waited for the helicopter, maintaining security around the bodies of two old soldiers who had finally laid down their rifles. The team stood in respectful silence, each man dealing with his own thoughts about courage and sacrifice and the strange honor of enemies who had more in common than the living and the dead. When the helicopter came, they loaded both bodies with care. Claire Donnelly and Dmitry Volkov, soldier and soldier, would make their final journey together. The medals and the ceremonies came later. The funeral at Arlington National Cemetery, where Claire was laid to rest beside her father, completing a circle that had begun with a promise made in rain 41 years before. The headstone was simple granite, carved with her name and dates in a single line, the shepherd who brought them home. At the ceremony, Mitchell read a letter that had been found in Claire's pocket, written in her hand, addressed to no one and everyone. To whoever finds this, the letter began. I have lived 62 years and I have learned that the only thing that matters is keeping your promises. I promised my father I would bring them all home. I promised Carlos I would remember. I promised myself I would die doing something that mattered. I kept those promises. 22 men from El Salvador, 6 from Afghanistan, all home, all alive. The 7 I lost will haunt me no more because I have finally paid the debt I owe. Not with blood, not with vengeance, but with mercy, with the choice to stop adding to the count of the dead. If there is a lesson in my life, it is this. We cannot change the past. We cannot bring back the ones we lost. But we can choose to save the ones who remain. We can choose to stop fighting. We can choose to be human again before we die. I have made that choice. I hope whoever reads this makes it too. Signed, Master Sergeant Claire Donnelly, the shepherd. The letter was placed in the military history archives, where it would be read by officers learning the cost of command, by soldiers learning the weight of choices, by children and grandchildren trying to understand what their ancestors had done in the name of duty. And in Afghanistan, on a mountainside that had witnessed empires rise and fall, a small cairn of stones marked a grave where 14 young men finally rested, remembered by 2 old soldiers who had carried them to the very end. The war in Afghanistan ended months later with a withdrawal that left much unresolved. But for Claire Donnelly, the war had ended earlier on a cold night in the mountains, when she finally put down her rifle and chose peace over vengeance. 6 men came home because of her sacrifice. 6 men who would live full lives, raise families, grow old. Their children would never know the name Claire Donnelly, would never know that their existence was a gift purchased with an old woman's final stand. But in a cemetery in Virginia, on certain quiet mornings, there was sometimes a man who stood before her grave, large, bearded, with the bearing of a soldier who had learned what honor meant. Steele came every year on the anniversary, bringing flowers, speaking words that only the dead could hear. "Thank you," he would say, "for teaching us, for saving us, for showing us that wisdom is not weakness and that mercy can be the hardest choice." And then he would salute, sharp and perfect, before walking away through rows of white stones that marked the price of freedom. The last shepherd had brought her flock home, had kept a promise made in rain and blood, had balanced a ledger that could never truly balance, but that she had tried her best to even. And in trying, she had become what her father knew she could be. Not a perfect soldier, not a flawless commander, but a shepherd who loved her flock enough to die for them. And in the end, that was enough.